Hello, and you're listening to The Christian Commute. This is your host, Seth Dunn. As you can probably tell already, you're not in the car with me today. I'm at the home of Scott Morgan. Scott Morgan is a longtime pastor from the megachurch world, and I'm interviewing him today about his experiences in the megachurch world. I'll let him introduce himself further, but just as a preview, he's worked for Johnny Hunt at the First Baptist Church of Woodstock, and he has worked for James Merritt, who is the pastor of Cross Point Church. Both of those men, former Southern Baptist Convention presidents. And I'm personal friends with Scott, and over the years he's told me his stories about working in megachurch world, about working for James Merritt, and he's decided to finally share his whole story publicly today, because I guess Scott just can't take it anymore after the latest public incident with James Merritt. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about James Merritt? Tell us who he is, as you know him, and then tell us, why it matters, why he's tweeting out his son's sermon and endorsing it.
Yes, James G. Merritt, James Gregory Merritt from Oakwood, Georgia. I've known James for, since about 1990. Got to know him through, I felt called to the ministry right out of high school in the late 80s, and I first met his associate pastor in the early 90s, and started spending time with his associate pastor, who was teaching me about, and the big popular word, Seth, back in those days was church growth. And so
that's how you met James Merritt. But James Merritt, for them, why he's important, SBC president,
yes,
very influential in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yes.
He was on the committee, on the stage at the Southern Baptist Convention this year. His famous words were, I'm paraphrasing, if we cared enough about critical race theory as we do evangelism, we have already won the world to Christ.
Yes.
James Merritt, at the Birmingham Convention, he was on some kind of racial reconciliation panel. So Scott's going to tell you his personal experience with this guy, but what you guys understand is James Merritt is about as influential as you can get in the Southern Baptist Convention, recently appointed, now not many people know this, but Scott does, by his good friend, Danny Akin.
Not just his good friend, his very best friend.
His very best friend. So for those of you who are observing on the outside and see, James Merritt has been appointed visiting professor at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, you think, okay, megachurch preacher gets appointed. No, this is a man's best friend giving him what has to be a lucrative side job.
And I would even say it like this, Seth. I would even say not just best friend, but a friend that will... a friend who should know better, that overlooks things. And it's almost like they have a relationship where it is if they can, one can do one thing, it doesn't matter what it is. There's just this buddy system, this good old boy system, and it doesn't matter what each one does. They've got each other's back. So when you say best friend, we need to really put an exclamation mark behind that a few times.
Thick as thieves. Is that an appropriate statement?
Thick as thieves. I would just say they're very, very thick. Thick friends, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thick friends. And this visiting professor, this megachurch pastor for whom you worked for years, he has a son who is written for Religion News Service and other publications, named Jonathan Merritt.
Correct.
Jonathan Merritt went to what, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary?
He went to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Okay. So his undergrad, Liberty.
I believe so, yes.
His Master's of Divinity, Southeastern Baptist.
Southeastern, yes.
Danny Akin, his dad's best friend. So this is a guy with a very Baptist education, but Jonathan is a liberal, and he's an out-and-out...
Well, let me correct you, not just liberal. A very, very ultra-liberal, whatever word we could put to describe liberal. He is to the farthest side.
Yeah.
And I would even say he's very sneaky. Sneaky, very sneaky.
And he's an open homosexual, and he lives in New York City, and he recently preached a sermon at his church, which is Good Shepherd Church in New York. And the Gungor music people are on staff at this church. If you know about Gungor, the quote unquote female pastors. So he preached a sermon that was not biblical in any way. And if you can listen to it if you want to take our word for it. If you don't want to take our word for it, you can listen to it. You want to go to Pastor Gabe Hughes has already put out a very good review of this sermon. It was not biblical. It was theological liberalism, the idea that Jesus keeps coming and coming. It's sort of this modern idea that sounds like a nice speech, but it's not biblical. And what really has rubbed Scott the wrong way, and why he's finally come out to just tell of his experiences, is that James Merritt got on Twitter, retweeted his son's sermon, and recommended it.
Yeah, Seth, it wasn't just the latest tweet by James that just has bothered me. I have watched this man for years, and I just finally just said, enough's enough. I can't just stay silent, pretend. I see him as a danger in the SBC, a very, very sneaky danger. James has a following of not just pastors, but even laymen that remember the old James. And the old James of the 1980s, early to mid 1990s, in my opinion, is no longer there. Okay. And I'm not talking about just philosophical issues. I'm not talking about church growth type things. I'm just talking about how he views the local church, how God should be worshiped, what he allows in the church. This is not the same guy that I remember from the late 1980s, early 1990s. Not the same guy. And so I'm very concerned, and I have been concerned. I'm going to let you kind of lead into this, but I've been very concerned with James speaking about racism, calling on my fellow, I remember, if I'm quoting him correctly, my fellow white brothers at the SBC, one of these interviews he was doing, James seemed to be kind of lecturing us. That was a trigger for me when he was doing that, because I don't know if James has forgotten, but I think that we'll need to get to this. But there's a joke that James had used for many years, and used to think it was quite funny, and I thought it was quite sick, named Rastus. And that's something that we can get into later, that he needs to address, he needs to come clean on. And but I'll let you kind of just ask the question, Seth.
We will get to that indeed, but the point I want to make for you listening audience is what you think you're seeing with James Merritt is this godly man who God has put in a position of leadership to shepherd others, someone who preaches biblical virtues and lives them out. But when you get behind the scenes, you see that it's anything but, and it's just a show for you. And what you have is just another Southern Baptist leader who's buddy-buddy with another Southern Baptist leader and another one, and they're all making money off God's people, but they're not necessarily living the life. And the way they treat the people who work for them would not fly in the most secular of workspaces. And that's where I come from. Yes, I've been to seminary. Yes, I've been to church my whole life, but I don't work in church world. I work in the world for worldly people. And the way that I've heard how Scott and other employees are treated, we just wouldn't fly even where I'm from. So with that, let's transition and say, Scott, give us just your resume, your ministry resume, how you came up and what you got started in, where you went to school and where you've been from there.
Well, I was converted to Christ in the late 80s. A man by the name of Keith Naylor shared the gospel with me. God opened my heart, drew me to himself, and saved me. And then shortly after, Seth, I really felt a strong burden. Scripture, a lot of times you'll hear guys talk about, their calling experience into the office of a pastor. Scripture says in 1 Timothy 3, it says, if a man aspires to the office of a pastor, he desires, I believe it says, a noble work, a noble calling. And I do believe that shepherding God's people in the local church is so important. It is so precious, and it should be a God-glorifying ministry. But I had this aspiration, desire to be a pastor. After I was converted, I was growing up in the Pine Lake Baptist Church. I had left the Methodist Church, thought I was a Christian, thought I had been baptized correctly. And then after God saved me there in the late 80s, I realized that my baptism was not right. Actually, I did not have a biblical baptism, and I followed Christ in baptism, and then I was added to the membership of Pine Lake Baptist Church. And that's where I began to be introduced to some of these mega church Southern Baptist pastors who I thought had hung the moon.
So what year was that, just for reference?
Early, I was converted in the late 80s, felt called to be a pastor late 80s, early 1990s, and then I was introduced to James's associate pastor at the time, who I just want to go on record and say, who I think still today was his best associate pastor, and I think it would have served James well if this man had stayed his associate pastor for even up until today.
And just for background to the people who don't know, the late 80s is probably the height of the conservative resurgence of the Southern Baptist Convention after the conservatives sort of took over from the liberals, which was an important thing to do. I don't want to minimize that because it was really bad in the late 70s. So after the conservatives under Adrian Rogers took over in the 80s, the mega church pastor became a thing. And you see this successive line of megachurch pastors taking over the pastorate, or not the pastorate, but the presidency of the Southern Baptist Convention. Adrian Rogers, Charles Stanley, who you've probably, very famous guys, but somewhat less famous, but still a big deal. James Merritt, Johnny Hunt, these people of the world. They all nominate each other. They're all in it together, so to speak. And they had to be, in order to get the liberals out, they had to organize. But you get the idea of the late 80s is church growth is the thing in the church business. How do you grow your numbers, and under what mega preacher and what style do you grow your numbers? And these mega preachers are amassing for themselves huge influence, huge media ministry, and they need staff to do it.
Correct.
And that's where people like Scott come in, who were trained in these church growth methods.
I think you described it perfectly. I really do. It's almost like some of these guys, it's almost like a Cosa Nostra. Our thing, our circle, mafia. They have
like a Don with foot soldiers. So if you imagine the megachurch pastor, like the Johnny Hunts and the James Merritts of the world is the Don. They have, if you've ever seen The Godfather, the Robert Duvall consigliere character, they have their right-hand man to execute their orders, and then they have their foot soldiers, if you will, to put out the hits. Lots of staff. So James, he is the pastor at FBC Snellville. So this is going on in Snellville, Georgia, right here in the Bible Belt.
Yeah, let me just say this real quick here. I did serve with James. I did serve with Johnny Hunt. I served with Jimmy Jackson, a very large church in Huntsville, Alabama, at Whitesburg Baptist Church. And let me just say this: Dr. Jackson was, one of the most godliest men. Anybody that knows Jimmy Jackson in Huntsville, Alabama, Jimmy was a rare guy, very, very godly man. He was the real thing. And let me just say this: even though Johnny and I had some theological differences at times, he was always very, very good to me. He was always very, very good to me. And I want to be very, very clear on that. Johnny was always very, very good to me, and I saw how he, impacted many others. Again, we don't all have to agree on methodology of how we do things, but they have to be biblical. But I want to be clear. My concern is with James, and I know that's where we need to zero in on. And my desire here is my desire is just to warn people. When I read scripture, Paul named names, and there's just been some things, as you've mentioned earlier, Seth, that James got quiet for a while, for a couple years after he left Snellville, and then he started Cross Point. You didn't hear James's name a lot as much as you did at one time, and now he all of a sudden, and I think it's mainly through Daniel Aiken. Danny has kind of given James some opportunities, brought James back into the
limelight,
and of course, some people would say, James never got out of the limelight. I understand, but I would just say, Danny and James, they are a team, and they will take care of each other. So
going back to your resume, Bible college at Luther Rice,
yes,
and then you get your job at FBC Snellville.
Well, that was actually, I served at a church right down the street from First Baptist Church Snellville first. Not long. It was Bethany Baptist Church. But I had developed a relationship with James's associate pastor, who would pick me up, take me to church growth conferences that he was leading. And we would just talk in the car, church growth, how to build a Sunday school, how to run 300, 400 people at your Tuesday night outreach night, how to build an evangelistic Sunday school, how to start new units, when you needed to start new units, when you needed to, what type of people you needed to recruit to run your Sunday school units. I know that this world backwards and forwards. And I learned that, I cut my teeth on that with James's associate. So I would go meet James's associate once a week or once every 2 weeks, and I would ride in the car with him to these conferences. And even, when you're a mega church pastor, or you're a mega church associate pastor, or you're a mega church pastor of education, you get a lot of invites from churches to do consulting work. When you're in the mega church world, you do a lot of consulting work. And so James's associate back in the early 90s did a lot of consulting. And so I would go with him and listen to him, sit down with laymen, and he would tell them, this is the type of, look your church needs to have. This is how the building needs to look. This is how the parking lot ministry needs to look like. This is how everything needs to be done. If you do this, you could probably be successful. So that's where I cut my teeth.
This is very interesting, because you're a kid in your early 20s.
Oh, yes.
Newly married.
I was married in 94, but I was already going out with James's associate before I was married, as far as spending time with him. And so obviously I was listening to James's sermons, on
audio tapes at this time.
Yeah, they were audio tapes. And I used to, let me say this, Seth, before we go any further. What I was young, and I'm not here to make excuses. I want to be very, very clear. I was old enough to know right from wrong, but there were some things that I had matured in, that I paid more attention to as I've matured in Christ, as I was growing older. And I used to think if you pastored a certain size church, you were just a better minister. Like when you look at 1 Timothy 3, you look at the pastoral epistles, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, that you were just doing something better than the guy that was running 200 in his church. And I've learned a lot about this mega church world. The guys that get hired a lot of times at these mega churches, they all have a certain type of personality. They all have a certain type of, I want something, I want this certain thing. They know who they need to latch onto to climb the ladder. And Seth, I just want to say to you, I got to be honest. I mean, I was guilty. I was guilty as charged. Man, there's no, but I thought from my poor theology at the time, that if a guy pastored a certain size church, if he had a media ministry, if he had, like you talked about, multiple staff members, that he was just a better minister. So I latched onto that. So I didn't want to go spend my time. I didn't get on the phone and call pastors running smaller churches. I purposely linked up with these guys. And one thing they do is, when you follow the mega church world that I was in for so long, You know, when you use the word foot soldiers, no one calls it that. Like if you were to go use that phrase and say, you know, how many of you out there were a foot soldier? Now, I think some who were in my world would finally realize what we're talking about. But pastors, not all. Jimmy Jackson was not this way at Huntsville. I mean, he was a godly man. And I want to be very clear here, again, about Johnny. Johnny was very, very good to me. I saw things with James that James loved having foot soldiers. And he still has them. I know who they are. He still has them. I can tell you what pastors they are. And no matter what he does, it doesn't matter. So I became, so when I was spending time with the associate pastor, I was at Bethany Baptist. I was minister of evangelism and working with young adults.
Now, I want to stop you right there. So you're minister of evangelism.
Young adults, yeah.
Young adults
Yep.
at it's a small, typical Southern
300,
Baptist
400
church,
people in the
300,
church.
400 people.
My first church, yeah.
You're going to Bible college.
Yes.
But the people like this associate of James, remind me of his name again.
Well, his name was Terry Harold.
So Terry Harold, he's consulting.
Yeah, Terry's a fine guy.
So
Yes.
what's going on though is not teaching Scott about soteriology
No.
or ecclesiology
No.
or church discipline
No.
or any of the other theological things you find in the Bible. What these guys are being called in for their specialty to do is how to grow numbers.
How to grow a church. Yeah.
Not grow a person. Not
Right.
disciple a person, but how to,
Right.
if you get your parking lot looking this way and you get your children's ministry looking this way, this is how you get people to come and this is how you get people to stay.
Or coffee bars today.
Coffee bars today.
Today,
So
yes.
you see, they take a guy who's in Bible college, but they're not discipling him about the Bible.
No.
They're discipling him about how to grow numbers, and this leads you into getting what you would call a better or bigger job at
Yes.
FBC Snellville.
Well, yeah, it was. I developed a relationship with Terry, and Terry,
And just from there,
yeah.
just let's go out your whole resume and
Yeah.
then we'll walk through it.
Okay.
Yeah. You think because there's a million pastors out there in the SBC. This is America. Anybody can be a pastor if he wants to. He can open up a
Right.
church. We have freedom of religion.
Oh, absolutely.
So just to make this point of Scott's experience, like he knows this world. So Bethany Baptist, FBC Snellville.
FBC Snellville.
What was your title there?
I had multiple titles there at Snellville for a while. I'm trying to remember. I was minister of evangelism. I also worked with young adults for a while. Wasn't the head guy over young adults, but I worked with young adults, and I worked a lot. I did a lot of projects. I actually had a role with James's media ministry for a little while. I wasn't on his media ministry, I guess, payroll, so to speak, touching lives. I was just paid, from the church, but I was involved with helping to raise dollars for Touching Lives.
So let me ask you this. Touching Lives is his media ministry.
Correct.
He owns it, right?
To my knowledge, yeah, he would own it, yeah.
So he has
a board and
employees
things like that,
on
yes.
a church roll. Like the church payroll is paying employees, but they are raising money or doing work for Touching Lives. They're not paid by Touching Lives.
James, that ministry was smaller at the time. It was growing. It was growing and developing. And, there were times that, I would, help that ministry and just different ways. I remember I was asked to share a testimony about the ministry, actually to the church. But I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. You're as a business person and a person who's in upper management, which you are, you would say it's cleaner, it's better to, if you're going to have a Touching Lives ministry, they need to have their own staff. Their own staff needs to do this. And then if I work for First Baptist Church Snellville or whatever local church, that's only the area I should focus on. And I understand that that's very common in the business world. But yeah, so I dabble in that. So I was at First Baptist Church Snellville, and then
And what was your title there when you left?
I think it was Minister of Evangelism, Outreach. And then when I left,
So Minister of Evangelism, but training in parking lot, how to get them in.
Well, you gotta understand, I was hungry to be a minister of education. I wanted to oversee the whole education ministry of the church, from the reaching, teaching, ministering part of the church. I wanted to get the Sunday school evangelistic. I wanted to make sure that we recruited outstanding teachers with the gift of teaching. I wanted to make sure that the Sunday school units were equipped well to minister to the people, care group leaders, etc. I wanted to grow the church through the Sunday school ministry. Even though a lot of your mega church pastors, if any honest minister of education, if he's honest, and if he serves with a pastor who has a strong gift of preaching, or maybe has a very, very, may not be a great preacher. It all depends on what you describe as good biblical preaching. But let's just say a man who's considered by most people that he's a good preacher. If he speaks well, he preaches well. That does help a minister of education because people want to keep coming back to the worship service. Then a good, strong Sunday school is going to know how to reach those folks and get them connected into a small group. So
how long were you at FBC Snellville?
Oh my gosh, a few years, and I left.
What top pay?
Yeah. What now?
Top pay.
Well,
your top pay at FBC Snellville.
Oh my gosh, you're. Well, I don't want to get into that. I mean, that's. It's not. That's a private local church issue. But I think I know what you mean. I think I know what you mean. I was early married. Ginger and I were married in '94, and then James's associate pastor heavily influenced me in wanting to be a pastor of education. Taught me how to do it. Taught me well. I will say this. He was as good as anybody. He was as good as anybody at what he did. I want to say this. I still believe, looking back with James over the years, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that James ever made, just in my opinion, was when Terry left, being his right-hand man. Terry ended up going pastoring for a little while at a church in Ohio, and Terry would bring me up. I came up, I think, maybe once or twice for Terry. I preached up there for him in Ohio, and I did a Sunday school training, even though I thought it was kind of funny. He brings me in to do a Sunday school training, and he was like one of the best at it.
So
but he brought me there.
You don't want to get into a salary. Yeah. What's a consulting fee for a weekend like that?
Well, okay, back in the back in the mid-90s. Well, it all depends on what churches you're consulting. If you're, let me tell you why it depends. If you're consulting at a church where the senior pastor is basically, there's no accountability. He basically can look at his administrator or his assistant pastor and say, give this guy, $1,500, $2,000 for just a Friday to come up. Maybe
1990.
Oh yes. Oh,
$2,000 in 1990.
Oh, absolutely.
That's.
Let me say this. I know when I would go do evangelism trainings at churches, sometimes I would get paid. I would do like a Friday night, Saturday till 12. I would be paid $800 to $1,000. Yeah, to go do a training.
That's a weekly paycheck for a lot of people now.
Yeah, and all my expenses paid. Yeah, but so when you're doing consulting, you can. It all depends. You can work out a consulting fee with any church, but these guys were taken care of, and because the Southern Baptists, it's been a problem for many years. If you were on a platform, if you got to a platform at the pastors' conference, if you got to, if you hung around certain guys, you got the invites to be a consultant, to do trainings at churches.
These are the circles we talk about of a lot of money to pass around.
Yes.
All this money is coming from a church budget. It's not falling out of the air.
Of course.
So you have people giving to church for the kingdom, and the church is turning around and using that money to hire consultants to grow people.
Yes.
So real quick, FBC Snellville, next place is where?
Well, so Terry went up and pastored that church in Ohio. Then he went back to serve. Terry did. Where he had come from before he came to Snellville, which was Whitesburg Baptist Church. Terry went to be the executive pastor there.
That's Huntsville.
That's Huntsville. Now, Terry was once the pastor of education there. Then he went with James. So Terry and I had kept talking, and he wanted me to come be the minister of education, pastor of education. Church running about 2,500 at the time. I was young, very, very young. I think I was probably the youngest, on the education staff, and I was leading it. And so I left and went up to Huntsville. And I have to be honest with you, I make no bones about it. I left because, I was climbing a ladder, man. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I wish I could look at you and say, my wife would certainly tell you, we actually loved it at Snellville. We had great friends there. I had certain goals in the ministry that, and notice how I said that I had certain goals. So I wanted to be a pastor of education and eventually, be an executive pastor. And I made the move to Huntsville.
And you guys in the business world, this happens all the time. At church, God has put it on our heart. He's been called here to do this. Yeah. This is not a guy level jumping. But in the business world, and this has happened at my work, where somebody who used to work where I worked has gone to get a higher position somewhere else, and then a couple months later, this person will come calling for his or her old staff people because they like to work with those people. And when they leave and it's for more money or whatever else, it's never, I was called to do this, or this is what God wants for me. It's, this is $10,000 more.
Yeah, let me tell you another thing that was always interesting about this world, the megachurch world. That's interesting. That a lot of people, it's hit me in the last several years. I've often wondered, you have to pay attention. I've just noticed this, that you would think that a pastor would want to put in his leadership circle men who were serious-minded men, godly men, men who feared the Lord, men who knew the Scriptures well. I've just seen a lot over the years in the megachurch world that was not the case. And so, when you're talking about staffing, one of the weird things I often thought about was, like in the college world, when you bring a college coach on, especially at a Power 5 school, he brings his own staff. So he brings his staff. So so you could have been a great assistant coach, position coach, a coordinator, but you were very rarely kept in the college world of football. Same thing is true in basketball. And what people find weird or maybe find amazing is that the same thing happened in the megachurch world. A new pastor would come in and it would just assume, I've got to bring in my own executive pastor. I can't keep this guy. And I just want to kind of go, a godly man, a pastor, certainly you would think, wait a minute. Yeah, that's that man's ministry there. How do you know that the staff, some of the staff members where you've gone now to be a pastor would not be a great minister?
Because it's not about the local church. It's about a career in ministry.
You bring your buddies. You bring guys that take care of you.
We're not under the illusion that Jimbo Fisher and Kirby Smart die hard about LSU. They were Nick Saban's guys. Correct. Kirby would move with him to Alabama and whoever, Joe Kynes, you're out the door. Forget you, buddy. And Joe Kynes is a good coach.
Correct.
But that's how it works. People work with their guys and they're all on contracts.
Yes.
And you have these people, if you think about it, like Scott's a diehard Auburn fan. I'm
Still
a diehard Alabama fan. And we're sitting in, his wife has put a bunch of Georgia stuff that you can't see in this office. And we're so die hard about this and we care so much. And you think about your local church, you're a member of that church, you've been there for 20 years, you've invested it, you've raised your kids there. But the people are basically like football coaches who don't care. Yeah. And they'll move around.
Correct.
But there's this idea, this illusion that God has called him, this is God's man for the job.
True.
And when there's $10,000 at the next town over, now he's God's man over there. And Scott's just admitting what people do, but we don't think this way.
True.
And you don't work for churches, you work for the people. And we all network in business. Well, that's okay. But now it's in ministry, and there are different rules from what the Bible says to what the world says, and it's like we're looking more like the world than the Bible.
Let me say this: one of the worst things that we've done in our local churches, and even if you're a pastor and you've had unlimited space, in other words, you could just pretty much do what you want to do. If you want to walk in the next morning and just fire a minister, let him go for just whatever reason. It doesn't have to be something. It doesn't have to be an immoral reason. It's just because you just don't think that guy's quite producing the number he needs to produce. Southern Baptists have hurt themselves in just giving just pure, just, okay, you're a senior pastor of a mega church, you do as you please, you have unlimited. And what happens is a lot of these mega church pastors will, if you will pay attention, and I have, see, I'm a studier. See, a lot of people, and you know this about me, and you and I talk, he's
not just saying that. His desk is, you can't see, it's covered over with books. Like John Gill from 1746. His basement is full of books. It's like he has no shelves, just books. He is a studier, so he studied these things.
Look, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't have, like, Seth, look, you and I have talked about before, like, my wife has her doctorate degree. I'm nowhere on an academic level, just in pure intellectual, where my wife is, just, and where you are. I mean, you're have an accounting degree, I believe. I've had to make up for a lot of my weaknesses just in being a ferocious reader. And so, so I study, though. I love to research things. Like when I'm one of these guys, like when I get on something, my wife will say, oh my gosh, you just let it, I mean, you're studying this, you've been studying this for like 4 or 5 months. I'll start buying every book on that subject. Well, one of the things that I noticed, just being in the mega church for years, is that a lot of these guys will bring men around them. Now, I didn't say every single one, but they'll bring men around them who I've watched. Some of them are not the most theologically minded men. A lot of them were businessmen, growth-minded men, real quick to pull triggers on this, or had this certain type of lifestyle. And I've often wondered, I never had a pastor tell me this, so I want to be very clear. I often wondered why they didn't put some guys on there that maybe would say, are you sure about that? Don't you need to think that through a little bit more? Is this biblical? Adding this into the service, has God commanded us to worship him in this way? Get into like the regulative principle, normative principle. But I just noticed that some mega church pastors, and I'm not saying it's just mega church pastors, but it's a very unhealthy thing to surround yourself with men who will let you just do what you want.
Men.
Yes,
who
man.
Are more
kind of like a foot soldier
about losing their position and prominence and network and stepping in and saying the right thing.
Yes.
Now, the problem with this in church world is because they're shepherding people's souls and trying to teach the Bible.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, why are you being cutthroat like you might be in the secular business world? That's where the problem comes in.
Yeah.
And I went to seminary with guys who would tell me, I'm a youth minister, and the senior pastor gave me a quota of 10, 20 baptisms. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, everything they're teaching us in this seminary is like, we don't have anything to do with who gets baptized. Like, God is saving the people. We're just sharing the gospel, and they have to be convicted to do that. Like, this is a work of God, and you're giving this guy a quota, this guy who makes, $30,000, $40,000 a year as a youth minister, a 20 or 50 baptism quota. Like, where do you get off doing that?
Well, that was look, let me say this again. There were 2 men. Let me say this. Johnny Hunt never did that. I will say that about Johnny. And Jimmy Jackson never did that. Johnny Hunt never came to me ever once. Johnny would expect you to share the gospel, and he should.
Right.
And he should. And just like Jimmy Jackson, the same way, Johnny would never do something like that. But Johnny would expect you, if you're a minister of the gospel, that you would want to go out and share the gospel. But there were some megachurch pastors that, when I was at Snellville, we were put under a system. I'm sure they still do it in business world. I've never been in the business world. So my brother is, and you are. So, but back in the late 80s, maybe this was even well before the late 80s, there was, and I think this is probably, come from some of these business guru guys. And by the way, it was always interesting. If you'll watch a lot of the megachurch pastors in the 80s and the 90s, they were always reading business books. It was very, very interesting, like, how to grow a business. It was almost kind of strange. But we were given at Snellville called KRAs. Every minister was given, I think it was 5, what was called KRAs, key result areas. And your raises were determined, or if you're going to be kept, on the key result areas. So, like, for an example,
were straight from 1 Timothy, right?
Oh yes, absolutely. 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1. Like it was interesting. You could have a guy that has a good soteriology, good doctrine of salvation, knows that God's elect are out there, but we've got to go take the gospel to the ends of the earth, and only God's elect will be saved. But yet our job, we're just told to go and to preach the gospel. But I was given like KRA goals where I had to produce, and I use that word very, very carefully. I mean, I had to produce, which is bad theology, but I had to produce X amount of baptisms a year. I remember that at Snellville. I mean, it was, if you didn't baptize like 400 or 500 people a year in our role, it was looked down on, and I had to run X amount of people at visitation night. So I'd go out there and try to work with our Sunday school pastors and try to make sure we had X amount of our Sunday school workers at our visitation night. So if I didn't run X amount of people at visitation night, then I would not meet what was called my KRA, excuse me. And each of the KRAs was weighted a certain percentage. In other words,
we have this in the business.
Okay, so you have that in the business.
We call them KPIs, key performance indicators.
Okay,
it's my job at my plant. I work at a carpet mill to make the KPIs of labor and time and cost. And then the managers are judged on those KPIs, and then their personnel reviews are weighted 20%, 10%.
Oh, yeah,
Their
that's what we
bonuses are
had.
based on this.
That's what we had.
On meeting those KPIs. So they didn't get this from the Bible. They looked at what businesses did and copied it.
Well, that is. Now we're back on air. Sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty.
Snafu.
It was me. So I'm a dinosaur when it
He's
comes to technology.
he's not a media minister.
No, I know. You don't hire me to do media ministry.
He's not the pale redheaded kid in the back with the sound booth making everything.
Well, I'm still not the minister, with the faux hawk either. The faux hawk, tight jeans, the Harley looking shirt.
So
anyway,
the audio, the people on the audio feed for the audio podcast didn't miss it, but the video people may have missed this.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll fix it in editing later. I'm not that type of guy either. But what we were saying is, as far as KPIs at work in the secular world, certain metrics that people have to make in order to meet their bonuses and they're weighted, and that is exactly taken from the world and put into church.
Yeah, and we were. I saw actually some good men at Snellville, some men that I respected, that I believe were godly men, that were moved on because they felt like their Sunday school area didn't hit 10% growth or more in a certain year or 2 years, or they didn't baptize. I remember I was told this specifically. All right, now this. I will defend this. I will stand against anybody that questions me on this, and I will give names if I have to. This was so wrong. I was told, not by Terry, but another associate pastor that took Terry's place. I haven't really told this a lot. We were looking to replace a student pastor who we had gotten from First Baptist Church Jacksonville. He'd come and serve for a couple of years.
That's First Baptist Jacksonville, Florida.
Yes.
Now, that's Jerry Vines at that
Dr.
time.
Vines' church.
Big church.
Yeah,
Jerry
absolutely.
Vines, another big deal.
So we had brought in their student pastor, and he came for a couple of years. And so anyway, long story short, I was told to take out for the afternoon a certain student pastor we were interviewing from the San Antonio, Texas area. He was at another very, very large church. I was told to take him out that afternoon, take him to lunch. Now, you would think, well, why didn't the pastor? I'm sure the pastor did.
You're taking a guy out to lunch to interview
him
for a job, and there's already another guy who has the job?
No. Our guy was already gone. We were looking for a replacement.
So you didn't Tommy Tuberville
yes.
this
No. Watch it, Mr. Alabama fan. But no, I was told by the education pastor to take out this youth pastor from San Antonio for the afternoon and bring him back to his office. And I was to communicate to him, to make sure he understood that if you're going to come to First Baptist Church Snellville, you have to be able to. And I'm just going to be honest with you, it's sick. And I hold myself responsible. I was a young pastor. And so what I'm about to say, I hold myself responsible. Like, why didn't I speak up at the time and say, what I'm about to tell this guy, this is not right? But I didn't do it. I was just being a good foot soldier, and you do what you're told. I was told to communicate to this guy, if we cannot baptize 100 kids a year out of this student ministry, then you don't need to come here. If you're not going to try to run X amount of kids at our visitation night, this is not for you. In other words, I was to communicate to this guy, this is a very, very a demanding youth position. It's like, if you're just going to come here and just kind of, teach good lessons on Wednesday nights and just try to and they would never say this, that none of them would ever say this. But I remember you would rarely ever hear in staff meetings when I was at Snellville where a minister would ever be asked, well, tell me about the people you're investing in. How many marriages that were on the brink of divorce that, because of our ministry and, through the preaching of God's word and through our discipleship ministry, through the work of the Sunday school, just you as a minister.
That's not a KRA.
Oh, no. I mean, it was like, you never talked about that stuff at staff meetings. We actually had a report. It was called the Church Growth Report. It was, man, I mean, we had to take what our giving was versus last year at the same time, Sunday school numbers, outreach attendance numbers. It was
we do that with square footage and sales. It's a sales meeting.
That is what we live by. And we would bring this to our staff meeting. And then we would have a staff luncheon. And then, and we were all told to, share how many people we shared the gospel with, which I got to be honest with you, as I'm evangelistic. I mean, because I'm a Christian.
We're all supposed to be, whether you're a minister or not.
I'm evangelistic because I'm a Christian, but I have no problem holding each other accountable that we need to be preaching the gospel. But there were times that you would hear guys, talk about, hey, I tried to share the gospel with this many people, but let's say there was no conversions. But then when I would share the gospel, I'd say, well, I had 3, surrender their life to Christ. Now, but let me tell you why. I was the one, when the guests filled out the guest cards on Sunday morning worship service, there was a question on the guest card that said, do you know for sure that if you died right now, you go to heaven? Yes, not sure, no. So I used to get all the cards of the people that would mark, I'm not sure of eternal life or no.
Bailey Smith, if you're 99.9% sure, you're 100% lost.
You're 100% lost. So I would go make those visits. But So going back again to that minister from San Antonio, it was just that whole lifestyle of it was performance. I mean, I don't see how any minister could truly have been happy, fulfilled as a shepherd. I'm using biblical words, fulfilled as a shepherd. You were a church growth agent, and then, I remember, by the way.
Could you imagine being some kid, feels called to the ministry, wants to go teach youth because youth ministry meant so much to him when he was coming up, he got saved, maybe he didn't come from a Christian family, he wants to do the same, and then you go meet with FBC Snellville's guy, if you're serious, you need 100.
Well, here's the deal. Let me say this. Remember I told you, and it's still true today, I believe it, it takes a certain personality to be a mega church pastor, or I like to use this phrase, foot soldier, to a mega church guy. Let me tell you why. There are a lot of guys that know, like they want to get to a certain church. So, let's say for example, I'm a youth pastor, and I want to become the youth pastor of a certain mega church. If I can get to be the youth pastor there, I do a good job. If I get such and such as recommendation, then maybe I can move to the education position of a church, groups pastor. You feed off each other. You feed off the title. You feed off what the Southern Baptists. One of the worst things that we do as Southern Baptists is that we platform guys. And you know who's some of the worst people with this? Our pastors. It's almost like we think these guys on stage are oh, if I could just be like them. There's guys that never will get on the stage that love Christ, that may be shepherding biblically. And we have created, I think one of the worst things we have is the pastors' conference. It creates an unhealthy, and you would think pastors would be discerning.
It's a trade show.
Yes.
So I just want to be clear that, sometimes you get these guys who've been out of the life or whatever, and they're doing the tell-all, and they couldn't hack it.
Cosa Nostra.
We're going through Scott's career because I want to show you guys that he's not some guy who couldn't hack it. He made his numbers. He's just doing this because it's the right thing. So from Whitesburg, you went to where?
Okay, Whitesburg. I was actually, it's funny you said that, asked me about that. I want to be... even if I disagree with a person, if they're right on something, they're right on something, okay? So I want to be fair. When I got up to Whitesburg, I started to regret when I got to Whitesburg, going to Whitesburg. Not because of Jimmy Jackson. Oh my gosh, I love that man. I thought he was a godly man. Very impressed with him. I miss Snellville. And I remember James telling me, you're missing God's will by going up there. And, no matter what James told me, I want to be fair. I mean, I don't like a lot of things I'm seeing from James now and hearing from James.
So he's going to lose an employee who's producing, and his response is, "You're missing God's will."
Well, yeah, he told me that. I mean, but and my wife also told me that. I want to be fair. I want to be very, very fair. I mean, Ginger loved it at Snellville. She did. But there were things that I didn't tell Ginger about Snellville a lot. I got to be honest with you, that bothered me. But at the same time, and Seth, let me just say it. I need to own it. I need to own this myself. Okay, it's been a long time coming. I can't just say I was a young pastor. Look, I use the system too. That's sinful. Okay, that was sinful. That was sin on my part. I used this. I knew after a while, what I was getting from the system. And I knew it. Though I didn't respect it, but I should have had more respect for myself. And so I used the system to help me get to a certain spot, and that I thought if I get here in the mega church, world, then that I have arrived. And then, of course, I'll talk about that in a minute when my world came crashing down on that whole issue there. But so I went from Whitesburg after a couple years being pastor of education. I did reach out to James. I want to be very, very clear. I want to be open. I did indicate to him about, possibly coming back, and he did communicate with me. He did, say, because they had gotten a new associate pastor. And to be honest with you, I've been hearing some things that, a lot of guys tell me that I wouldn't like him. He came from Bellevue.
Another giant mega church. That's Adrian Rogers,
yes.
Steve Gaines now, flagship church.
Yes.
I mean, do you hear the names? You're not hearing Podunk XYZ.
Correct.
I'll pass Sutali Baptist Church. You're not hearing that.
Is it Sutali?
I don't know. Some church on Highway 20.
Sutali.
I mean, these guys. It's like Alabama doesn't hire from Kent State. Alabama hires from LSU. Alabama hires from Texas A&M. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you're young and up and coming.
So these guys, they're not pulling from these low places. They're pulling from Bellevue, Jacksonville.
Yes.
I'm talking Adrian Rogers, Jerry Vines. These are superstars in the SBC.
Yes, and so I remember meeting James. He was cutting his parents or his mother's lawn. I showed up to meet him. I think it was on North Road there in Snellville, and he was in the backyard on a riding lawnmower cutting his mom's yard, which was a good thing. And he was telling me about, you'd have to go to dinner with my new executive pastor. You should have never left in the first place. And he was right. I mean, look, I can disagree with somebody, but if they're right on something, they're right on something. And so, but at the same time, Woodstock was talking to me. Just kind of going to lunch or dinner, I'm trying to remember, with James's new executive pastor, I just was like, this is no. And so I went to Woodstock.
You went to Woodstock.
Woodstock,
mega church, Johnny Hunt, another SBC president.
Yeah.
So you worked at Woodstock for how many years?
Gosh, it was 4 years. And
what's your role there?
I was pastor over, I think it was called pastor over young adults and discipleship. So I think I was overseeing from as early as if you were married, like if you were married at 20 all the way up to, maybe 45.
How many pastors are at Woodstock?
Oh my gosh, we had tons. I mean,
20, 30?
I would say it would be closer. I could be wrong on this. I would say it's probably pastors. It's got to be 30.
30 pastors.
I mean, I could be wrong.
All reporting up to like Jim Law's executive pastor.
Yeah, Jim was executive pastor.
And then Johnny Hunt's the guy.
Yeah, Johnny was the pastor.
So you were there for 3 years.
3.5 years.
And then where did you go from there?
Well, my theology changed. My theology started to change at Whitesburg.
From reading? Reading the Bible? Or
both? Yes. Well, no. I was always reading the Bible, but it was
you learned about sociology from a church growth conference. I'm just pointing out, like, his theology didn't change from going to a consultant. No. It was from studying the Word.
Well, it was studying the Word. I tell you where it was. I started really listening to a lot of R.C. Sproul. Started listening even more and more to John MacArthur. But God used a book in my life by a professor and this guy that I have high respect for, Dr. Tom Nettles. He was a professor of Baptist, I think it was Baptist history and theology at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And he had written a book called By His Grace and For His Glory. And basically it was the history of Southern Baptists from 1845, where Southern Baptists came from theology-wise under the area of soteriology. And I realized, I was like, whoa, if this is true, all these confessions of faith, and I started like doing my homework. I started like just reading confessions of faith from churches, Southern Baptist churches in the from the mid 1800s into late 1800s, early 1900s. And I started realizing, golly, it's 5-point Calvinism. It's 5-point Calvinism. And so my theology changed. Right before I left Whitesburg, I was a true 5-point Calvinist.
And to be clear, that doesn't violate the Baptist Faith and Message 2000.
Absolutely
so to
not.
say your theology changes, you're still a Baptist. You still believe in baptism by immersion, not sprinkling babies like R.C. Sproul. You still believe
don't beat up my...
I'm just saying, you're still a Baptist. None of your Baptist credentials changed.
Correct.
There's lots of people who believe this
Yes.
in the Southern Baptist Convention,
Correct.
including seminary presidents. I believe Danny Aiken. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Al Mohler and I think Aiken.
Well, you're talking about Aiken being a 5-point Calvinist? Danny would probably say he's Calvinistic. I've actually heard him say that before. I mean, I've been with him before at lunches and dinners, but I've heard Danny say he's Calvinistic. Now, I've never heard Danny ever say, I want to be fair, I've never heard Aiken say he is a 5-point Calvinist. I've never, and I would say he would struggle on the issue of particular atonement unless he's changed,
But Al Mohler is president of the flagship seminary. David Platt, who was president of the International Mission Board.
Correct.
So all that to say is Scott's position is not unique or obscure in the SBC. It's prominent among many
but
people. But it is controversial, especially with who?
Well, the Calvinism issue when I made the move to
it's controversial with
certain pastors.
Johnny Marshall Hunt.
Johnny Hunt. Johnny was not a 5-point Calvinist, and
he's not. But there's a lot of people who aren't, and they're just like, oh well. Yeah. And then there's people like Johnny Hunt who write against it and preach against it.
Well, Johnny was not. I mean, I want to be fair. I mean, Johnny was not a Calvinist, and Johnny did preach against certain points of the soteriology when I was there at Woodstock. Johnny and I did have a disagreement over Calvinism. We did. I will say this, that there were times that I did push back against him when probably I should have been more patient.
Cage stager.
Well, yeah, you could say that. I mean, you could say, there were times I remember he was gracious to meet with me in his office, and I would come in there and I'd have, like, not only my Bible, but I would have, like, Confessions of Faith of Baptists. I even pulled the Woodstock First Baptist Confession of Faith off their website. They actually, if you go back and look at even Woodstock's heritage, they actually have on there, like, the doctrine of election. God chose a certain number of the human race unto salvation, particular atonement. But anyway, so Johnny and I had a disagreement, and Johnny, I'll never forget. He wrote me a real nice letter. I have it somewhere. I probably have it somewhere in my office here. I may still have it in a folder. But I always worked hard at Woodstock. I always was faithful in evangelism. We had so many people coming from my area for a visitation night, outreach. Sunday school was growing. And Johnny was, let me just be straight, and I want to say this. Mega church, Woodstock, people were coming to hear Johnny. Yeah. So we had.
I went to hear Johnny too. I was there for 2 years.
We had tons of people. I mean, it made it easy for education guys to go and try to get those that were visiting the church that were not coming at first because they wanted to come and check out Woodstock Sunday School. Yeah. They were coming to hear Johnny. I mean, they were. And so it made life easier for us to go after these folks. But so John and I had that disagreement over Calvinism, and he felt it best that with our disagreement over Calvinism, and he didn't feel like that having a 5-point Calvinist on his staff at the time was a good move. So I moved on, and
that's nothing against him, because he's trying to do his job.
Yeah,
Johnny is.
Yeah, Johnny was.
So you wouldn't want to be a 5-point Calvinist pastor and have some 2-point
I understand.
Holy Ghost,
Yes.
5 invitation guy
Yes.
working for you.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to say that's bad on Johnny.
Yeah, not at all.
Even though he's wrong.
Not at all.
But
not at all.
It's just,
Not at all.
That's why Scott had to move on. And where did you move on to?
Well, I went for a little while to, I had a friend, it was so funny, he used to be at First Baptist Snellville and used to serve with Jerry Vines. He was Jerry Vines' student pastor, Kenny St. John. Kenny had went to a Calvinistic Southern Baptist church that was booming at the time. Booming. Matter of fact, it was Riverbend Community Church in Ormond Beach. It used to be First Baptist Church, Ormond Beach, and they had moved out from the beach community area because that's where nobody from the community was living there. It was all tourists. And so they had bought like 100 acres of property out more where the regular folks lived. When I say regular folks, the folks of the community lived in Ormond Beach. And it was a safe place for me to go for a while. They wanted me to come down to head up their education ministry. So I went down to Riverbend Community Church. It was a Southern Baptist church. And what was so interesting was it was when the Calvinism issue was all going down the SBC. You had the Founders Ministry battling the Caner brothers, and the Caners were battling them, and all the different ministries were kind of, you had the Calvinists and non-Calvinists. Yeah. Well, Riverbend was a very vocal church. Pastor Roy Hargrave was very vocal.
And you guys need to understand, before critical race theory and outright liberalism, this is what Baptists argued about.
Well, at least during this time.
It seems tame now.
Yeah.
Because and people who believe in the inerrancy of Scripture and evangelism talking about soteriology. Yes. And now, I remember 10 years ago, I wish we could argue about that again. Now it's critical race theory, cultural Marxism, correct, and liberalism, and female pastors.
Pastors, Beth Moore.
Oh my gosh, line me up some 2-point guys who actually believe the Bible.
So I went down to Riverbend, and let me tell you how Calvinistic this church was. It was even though I was a 5-pointer, but I'd like to say I was more of a. We have to be careful to say I was more of a Spurgeon Calvinist rather than like a John Gill. Now, I love John Gill, but Gill had, you can read Gill. Any man that's honest, and if you read John Gill, you see the hyper Calvinism.
3
Gill.
Listeners know who that is.
Yes, but you see some things in Gill, and then different things in Spurgeon. I would be more of where Spurgeon was that. I want to get to, I don't have an elector detector. I go to all men and preach the gospel.
The Prince of Preachers, well respected among any.
Yes. So when I got to Riverbend, I'll never forget, they had 100 acres, church was growing, and it was right down the road from First Baptist Church, Daytona. Bobby Welch, Mr. Faith. Remember, had the faith evangelism training thing? It was real popular. Well, Riverbend had really taken over the popularity of that community because Ormond Beach, Daytona Beach is right beside each other. And so
this is like crime families battling over.
This is like Gambino versus Lucchese. You know what I'm saying? This is Cosa Nostra, the 5 families battling. So Pastor Roy and them were. This is what I respected. Pastor Roy and them weren't real tight with the Founders Ministry. It was weird. They respected the Founders Ministry, right? But I wouldn't say Tom and Roy were super close.
Tom Askell.
Yeah. Now Tom, I have great respect for Tom Askell, great respect. But Tom and Roy weren't close. But it wasn't that they were enemies or anything. They just didn't really hang out a lot. And so, because Cape Coral was in a different part of the state than obviously Ormond Beach. So I remember hooking up Pastor Roy with the Founders guys, and they actually came over to our church and did the Founders did a board meeting over there. But anyway, going back to Riverbend, I remember when we pulled up, Ginger, I told Ginger about it. And of course, she had been down to the church a couple of times. They had when Johnny and I had our disagreement over Calvinism, the church would host us down there some just for like a weekend. So when we pulled up, this church was so Calvinistic. When you pulled up on the church property, it was 100 acres. You'd pulled up they have a street sign on the church property that said like Spurgeon, whatever.
Drive.
Then you take a right on Whitfield. Then you would take like a left on Calvin. And they had all like these Calvinistic theologians. It was really hardcore. Which, I thought it was cool at the time.
This is like Summit Drive and Manning Drive in Knoxville.
Yeah, yes. And this would be the church growth guys of the 80s and early 90s would say, no, you don't put these type of signs out on your church parking lot. You got to put these nice colored banner looking things with your new logo. They wouldn't say put Calvin out there, but at least Riverbend laid their cards on the table and they told people, when they got there, Roy would say from the pulpit, he would say, look, we're not a typical Southern Baptist church. We are a historic Southern Baptist church that believes that these things called the doctrines of grace. You'll notice at every door corner we have like this book cart, and you can get like a free copy of a book on what we believe, blah, blah, blah. So I had served down there a couple years. And by the way, this was the church. This was the first time I had ever seen in my life. This was the greatest pastors. Every pastor on that staff.
What were your KRAs there?
They laughed KRAs out. No. They believed in the sovereignty of God and salvation. They believed that, our job is to make sure that we, preach the gospel and of course God saved his people. But at Riverbend, all the pastors had to be 5-point Calvinists. There was no bending of that. They had to embrace the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. And this was the first church, Seth, I ever served in that practiced not only church discipline, but practiced it biblically. Like, they didn't just practice church, they did it biblically. I saw people even that had to go through church discipline that after they would not repent, after X amount of times they were confronted, when they were finally removed from the membership of the church, eventually come back in repentance a year later, and the church, met with them and welcomed them back. It was a very refreshing time for me.
Just to be clear, biblical church discipline runs counter to the church growth movement, because
of course it would.
When you confront somebody in their sins, it may run them off, and then they'll say, "Don't go there; they're judgmental."
Yeah. And so we were there, and then we planted after a while. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I love Riverbend. Okay, Riverbend was a great church. It was a great church, biblical church. That's when I started wanting to pastor more, like be the head pastor. Now let me be real clear when I say head pastor. My theology, I do hold to a plurality of elders. I really do.
There's no such thing as head pastor.
That's exactly right.
I've said that on this podcast a million times.
You're right.
Senior pastor, youth pastor, XYZ pastor is not the Bible. You just have elders, and that's it.
I agree.
And we have somehow in our society come to the idea that this guy is the head pastor or senior pastor, and everybody else works for him. That's not in the Bible anywhere.
Yes, and so we came back and we wanted to plant a church, and so I had a short-term ministry at First Baptist Church Oakwood. Okay, First Baptist Church Oakwood, and it was a smaller traditional church, but my theology was, and I was up front with that
Oakwood,
church.
Georgia?
Yes,
that's like the Gainesville area.
Yes, I was so up front with them. Like, I remember even in the meetings we had, I literally noticed, like, when I had my first meeting with him as a pastor committee, like pastor search team, not one person brought a Bible to talk to me as a pastor. I brought my Bible in there. And let me tell you how bold I was. It was just the Spirit of God just moving my heart. I looked at it all up and I literally said, no one in here has a Bible except for me. And it got real quiet. It's like, you would think, we don't want this guy. He's calling us out. And I literally walked out of the room, okay, with the guy that was the chairman. We walked into the worship center, and I think we had hardback blue copies of the Bible, and we brought back Bibles into that meeting, okay? I had printed out for them a copy of the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith and the Baptist Faith Message. I passed those around and said, this is what I believe. Well, they weren't theological, and so, I know some would say, oh, you snuck in like stealth. No, let me just say this. It's not my fault that they didn't study their Bibles, okay? Mm-hmm. And I use that phrase a lot. That's on them. So I pastored there for a little while, and then I started a church, a new plant, and I started a hardcore, and I mean hardcore, founders, Riverbend type, 1689 Baptist Confession church, Fellowship Community Church, right down the road. When I say right down the road, when I started a church, probably it was about 15 minutes away. Planted a church there. And Riverbend was very, very helpful to us and supported us. And I had another elder in Dan, and we were the type of church on Sunday morning where we would read portions of our church confession with biblical support, the 1689 Baptist Confession of Faith. So I pastored there for a while. So then from there, God started convicting me. We took the Lord's Supper once a month, okay? And this is really important. This is where, Johnny Hunt was very, 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 very gracious to me. Very gracious. When I left Woodstock, I carried a lot of bitterness from that. When I went down to Riverbend, I did. I carried a lot of bitterness. Wanted to prove to him that I was right and he was wrong, blah, blah, blah. So I carried a lot of bitterness, and I wish I had handled some things a little bit different. And so anyway, long story short, so I get to Riverbend. I get to plant this church. And so we're serving the Lord's Supper, and I'm fencing the table. And I remember saying, if you have something against a brother...
Can you explain fencing the table to the people who go to these KRA churches and have no idea what that means?
Well, we don't... Now, there'll be a lot of listeners that wouldn't agree with me theologically on this position. Our church held to a closed communion. We were closed communion. We only served the Lord's Supper to church members
of that local church
that were in good standing.
So
yes,
there's different kind. There's open communion, which is they'll just give it to anybody.
Let's say that. That's about true.
Which you should have to be a Christian to get communion. But they'll give it to anybody who's just there.
Yes.
And then there's sort of a semi-closed communion where they'll say, this is only for Christians. And if we're at First Baptist Church and you're visiting here today from Second Baptist Church, you're welcome to it. But if you're not a Christian, don't do this.
Yeah, let me say.
And then there's closed, which is unless you're a member of this church,
particular church,
don't even come up to get.
And we would explain that. And let me just say this to you. Obviously,
well, just one more thing. Also, in all these instances, you say, now, don't come up here and partake unworthily if you're in some unrepentant sin.
Yeah, let's just say like my mentor, like when I say one of my mentors I love, from a mentor from a distance, R.C. Sproul. You've heard this phrase before. What if R.C. Sproul showed up at your church one day, and of course he loved the 1689, portions of it, obviously. And would you had let R.C. Sproul taking the Lord's Supper? Well,
right after I baptized him.
Right after I baptized him. but I considered R.C. unbaptized.
Yeah. He was. You're right.
I'm a Baptist, but
we'll baptize him when the resurrection comes.
So
we go back. You're fencing the table.
Okay, so we're fencing the table, and so we would fence the table very, very strongly. And I remember saying something like I normally did, like if you have some issues with a fellow church member, or just with somebody you need to make things right with. And that you need to repent, you need to go get things right. Don't take this supper unless you can do that. Well, I was feeling real convicted that like when Johnny and I had that disagreement, when I was on his staff, I just felt like the relationship needed to be. I needed to reach out to him, and so I reached out to Johnny and said, listen, I know we disagree over, Calvinism, but I said, I carried some bitterness and how all this thing went down, and I just wanted to, without getting into a lengthy thing here, I just told him, I wasn't looking for him to apologize to me for anything, okay? It was just me realizing, hey, I'm responsible for Scott, and I felt like I was... I didn't handle some things. I had a lot of bitterness towards him. Mm-hmm. And so I did everything I could to build that relationship back, make it right. And he was very gracious with that.
And you say this, I never hear a story about Johnny Hunt where he's not gracious. That's his reputation as a person.
He is. And he was very, very quick in his, the thing I respected about him at the time was this. I know that I had been very strong against him after that issue had happened. And the fact that, let's be honest, sometimes it takes us time when a person says, hey, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. They have to chew on it for a while. They know they're supposed to, forgive, but, we're men and we struggle with that. And Johnny at least he didn't put his hands up and say, whoa. He was very welcoming of that. Now, whether or not he was totally in a position where he was truly, forgave me for, how I handled some things pretty roughly with him. He at least opened that process up big time. And I was grateful for that. And so he and I stayed in contact with each other for a while. And then all of a sudden, we started communicating more. And then word had gotten out that Johnny and I had reconciled this issue. and I was the one that felt like, I still believe this today. I mean, I just want to make sure that Scott handled things that Scott did. Okay. And I wanted to make sure I did that. And Johnny was very gracious about that. So we met and we talked. And again, I'm going back several years, so I'm trying to remember how everything happened. I remember he was doing a conference, a training, Timothy Barnabas training over at the Gwinnett Marriott and I was living in Beaufort. And word had gotten out, that I had written an open letter to Johnny, and I did. Because I thought, if I'd said some things publicly about him, I at least need to do the right thing and go back publicly. And if I felt like I was wrong on something, I need to say this was wrong publicly. And I did that. And so Johnny was very gracious and asked me to come meet with him at the Gwinnett Marriott. And we went to a private room. It was Ginger and I and him. And all I remember that day, there were a lot of people who were like, man, Scott and Johnny are back talking again. Like, that's got to be a good thing. And he was so gracious. I won't get into specifics about what took place in that meeting. What I mean by that is just some things that nobody would understand. Like what I mean is this: every person has a way of showing, obviously biblically we're to forgive. Johnny said some things to me that were very, very. It touched my heart that day.
Long story short, this opened up your relationship with him, where you
we
were eventually able to go back and work at FBC Woodstock on the pastoral staff again, but not before going to...
Well, I went back to work for James.
At Crosspoint.
Yes.
But so you left your church plant and went to Crosspoint. So by then, James Merritt had left FBC Snellville.
Oh, yes, and started Crosspoint.
Founded Crosspoint.
Yes.
Just himself. Just he with some people maybe.
Yes, and there's some things that when James then left Snellville, it was not a pretty.
Did he take his office furniture with him when he left Snellville?
That is the word, or he wanted to.
Okay.
Okay, that's a whole I've heard different takes on that, but I heard that was some issues there.
Is there a sense of entitlement with the Merritts?
No doubt about it.
Okay. So.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I think that some of it comes in the mega church world, not just with senior pastors, even though there I go again, senior pastor, but going back to the Johnny thing.
So you're just we'll get to Johnny later.
Well, let me say on this real quick, because I think it'll help those who are listening. Johnny did invite me back on his staff. And I got to be honest with you, I had a lot of people saying, man, you need to go back, man. That'd be great. I just didn't feel, because the Calvinism thing was such a big deal. Mm-hmm. And I regretted how I handled things. Okay, it just didn't feel like it was going to be smooth. Not on his part. It would have been totally smooth on his part. Just have to go back and hearing people say, "Man, y'all had this issue," and so I decided, and he was very gracious. I said, "Hey, Johnny, I just don't feel like God's leading me there." And I think a lot of it was just going back and rehatching that. Mm-hmm. So James had reached out. We had been talking. James said, hey, I have a need. And so I went back. I went on staff with him at Crosspoint Church. But I knew, going back to Crosspoint, here's what I did know this. And this is where I got to, again, accept responsibility on this part. I knew that Crosspoint was not at least First Baptist Snellville in the sense of a more of an upbeat traditional type service. Mm-hmm. There were things that Snellville that you couldn't have done at Snellville that now you could probably do at Crosspoint. The type of ministers that they would hire at Crosspoint would not have been hired in some ways at First Baptist Snellville back in the early 90s.
To put it blunt, yes. From suits to skinny jeans, the James Merritt story.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Okay. So,
and I'm not just saying that. I know he wears skinny jeans. And I had a pastor tell me, you should have seen the skinny jeans this guy was wearing. And it wasn't you, it was somebody else. And I'm not going to, because that guy said, I'll kill you if you tell me, if you say it was me. But this is kind of that change to, he's competing with Andy Stanley.
Yes, I knew.
The Alpharetta area.
Yes, I knew. I could just look
This is in the Alpharetta area, correct?
Crosspoint?
Yes.
Crosspoint was not too far from there. It was Duluth area. It was right off 85. Right there, Satellite Boulevard, over near the Gwinnett Arena.
Okay. So
Sugarloaf Golf Course Community area.
A lot of people.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that's a huge population center, and there's a lot of competition for church members there.
Sure.
Andy Stanley's got a place there now.
Not too far. Matter of fact, he actually opened the door at Cross Point. I think it was after I left to allow one of Andy's Gwinnett campus to meet in his facility.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's another character issue that I have with him.
Okay, so let's get to your relationship with the Merritts. When you worked at Snellville, I mean, you babysit their kids.
At times we did. There were times that James and Teresa would go out of town on, James would be preaching all around the country. And I think Ginger and I watched their kids a few times, for them while they were gone. Well, I know we did. I just don't remember exactly how many. I do remember my wife having to, a funny thing, my wife had to, about a mile away from their house, their oldest son was mocking my wife's car. And he was literally mocking my wife's car, complaining about it. And you know what my wife did? So here I am working for James. She stopped the car on the side of a road near their neighborhood and said, "Get out of the car, then you walk home."
So you got this.
I'm freaking out, bro. You got
a mega church pastor's son. He's probably making over $100,000 a year by far, and his little staff guy in his 20s and his wife at 27.
I think she was driving a Ford Tempo.
He's driving, and that's a crappy car. I don't know how. Sorry if you're listening on a Ford Tempo. They don't make them anymore. I guarantee you, no one's listening on a Tempo because they don't last.
I actually bought that car for her.
So
right before we got married,
didn't love your wife enough to buy her a nicer car than a Ford Tempo.
Well, wait a minute now. I was so young, man.
So you have a young guy, and this is the attitude of the house, that this rich kid is mocking his dad's employee's wife's Ford Tempo.
Did. Well, he did, and
how old was he?
God, he was young. I mean, he was young.
I mean, kids are going to be kids.
They are. They were young, and obviously, I'm sure I had behaved like that at his age.
But this is the difference. Yeah. This is,
it is
from Olympus to the people at the bottom.
Correct. And so we used to, and I used to take James to the airport a lot when I was on staff at Snellville, like when he would go to one of the other mega churches to preach.
Drive your Tempo to the airport?
No, I actually had a nicer car than my wife. Okay. Shame on me, right?
Shame on you.
Shame on me. So no, I would. The church gave James a car.
The church gave him a car.
Yeah.
Does anybody where you work? They just give you a car?
Can I be honest with you? That is actually very normal. I didn't say you could argue and see if it's right. I'm just saying in the mega church world, most of your pastors get a car. I mean,
I know it's normal in mega church.
Yes.
I know a precious chosen few,
or a church from
in secular world who get a car. I mean, I know people with company cars.
Yeah,
but it's not a lot.
Yeah. So I would take James to the airport.
What kind of car did he get?
He would always get a new one like I could be wrong on my dates here. 2 years.
So they're leasing a car.
Yeah, I remember driving him in a Q45. It was his. And
so let me get a church.
An Aurora
is getting an Infiniti Q45.
Somebody's paying for it, but it wasn't him.
A church is just, this is what our pastor needs to drive around with. How many people in the church are driving Infiniti Q45s? I mean...
Yeah, I understand. And he had his own gate. He could park in his own little gate area. He had his own little gate area where he could park privately.
What do you mean? There's a gate?
Well, yeah, it was like a parking area. I don't know how long he continued to park there because it was the new building. But he could park in a little secluded area.
He didn't have a space. He had a gated space.
Yes, it was protected, kind of. Like it was gated. A lot of these guys always have their.
Who's it? Keith Moon? I mean,
they'd have their bodyguards.
He had a bodyguard.
Well, he had guys that would walk with him, body men or whatever you want to call them. Well, he'd have people that would walk with him off the platform when he would speak back to like a green room to greet our guests.
Oh, I mean the lifestyle.
Yes. Yes.
Church gives you an Infiniti with a gated parking space.
Yes.
And escorts for you to go to the green room to meet the people who are lucky enough to meet you that day.
I guess so. But one of the things we didn't talk about is when I was at Snellville back in those days, if I met my baptism goals, I was literally sent to downtown. Never forget it. There was a suit maker, Bespoke Apparel. They made suits for
Buckhead or downtown.
Well, no, Buckhead. It was Buckhead. I think.
So you national listeners, you don't know what Buckhead is, but it's the banking district in Atlanta.
Correct.
It's the ritzy, very rich part of downtown Atlanta.
Yes, and
Atlanta is poor.
James
but Buckhead is rich.
Yes. James had his own suits, custom made. So if I was a good loyal staff member, met my numbers, I remember getting the opportunity, and I didn't say no, Seth. I mean, so I hold myself responsible. I was sent down. I think I got a total of 3 to 5 suits. I'm trying to remember, and I was able to get some. My brother used to tease me, so I looked like a pimp, but I was able to get some skin shoes, like skin shoes.
Like Ric Flair.
Not like I had
alligator skin.
There was. I remember getting a pair of alligator that the guy told me that there was an athlete. I think he was either a Brave or a Falcon that wore one time, and he didn't want them anymore, and he gave them back, and they were alligator, but he dropped the price, but I didn't have to pay for none of this. It was just James. I was just told James sent me down.
FBC Sailmill's picking up the tab.
Well, somebody's taking care of it, and I remember this guy's name was Jacques.
Jacques. He's dressing you like Ric Flair.
He did. And
so, woo!
Yeah, so I went and got those because I was meeting my KRAs and my. But see, here's where I look back and go, God used that as a time where there were times.
What's one of these suits cost?
Well, let me say this. Back then, if I remember correctly, they were $800 to $1,000 suits.
That's in the 90s.
Yeah, that was in the 90s.
So they were nice. Maybe a $2,000.
They were nice. But that was back in those days, and then
Did the church have a feeding ministry? They feed poor people?
They did.
So poor people get a sack of peanut butter and jelly. These are the typical. This is what goes into feeding ministry. You get peanut butter and jelly for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Yes. You get spaghetti noodles. That's the type of what else is the typical thing if you go to the feeding ministry?
Get maybe some potatoes.
Potatoes.
All right. Rice.
Rice is another one.
Macaroni.
Maybe some canned soup.
Yes.
All right.
That would be
so you maybe get a $30 to $40 grocery bag for the week at the feeding ministry, and they're sending their pastors to get $1,000 suits.
Well,
in Buckhead.
It wasn't all pastors. It was just certain ones.
The ones with the KRAs.
The ones that they wanted to take care of. I mean, there were times I was given a credit card. I remember to go to take my wife to a certain restaurant.
This is megachurch world.
Yes. So those things happened back those days. But here's the deal, though. I have to take responsibility. There were times I kind of said to myself, I want to be straight. Who's paying for this? I wonder if the church knows. Now, but even though it crossed my mind, but it did not move me enough. I mean, look at Timothy. Paul had so much confidence in Timothy to leave Timothy behind in Ephesus to deal with false teachers, and he was younger than I was probably. And to look for certain type of men that met the qualifications for a pastor. So I'm without excuse. And what I'm trying to say to you is this. If Timothy had that discernment and could handle that, I should have just said, this ain't right. But I knew you didn't. I knew that if you just didn't do that. You didn't say it's not right because
it's hard. And I think they know it's hard for young men to turn down $1,000 suits and taking your wife out.
Well, I just
special privileges.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it makes it right. No, you were wrong, Scott. I'm just saying that's how. I mean, people are impressed with the gifts. People don't want to say no to the stuff they're getting.
Yeah, and that was a little bit of my world. But anyway, so getting to Crosspoint, going to Crosspoint,
and now we're going to get down to the character of James Merritt. Not just ridiculous stuff like he runs KRAs. We're talking about how he treats others. Because we know that there are men out there who legitimately think they're doing God's work if they have a parking lot repainted and get 100 more people to church. That's what they truly believe. And then they go home and they're loving to their family and they're nice to the people who work for them and they treat other people like they were actually made in the image of God. So there's people, we're not talking about just that kind of ridiculousness and sending people in your Q45 to the suit store. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the character of James at this church that he's founded himself, and he's put his son, Jonathan Merritt,
he was on staff when I came there.
What are his qualifications? How old is he to be on staff?
Well, he was young. I mean, he had gone to seminary. I could say this. I mean, to be fair, I could say, even though it was James's son, the scripture doesn't say that his son couldn't be on staff. I mean, okay, let's just.
That's not uncommon in megachurch world for people to hire their own children,
or family members or whatever. Yeah. Yes, I'm just saying. At
least he went to school.
Yes, yeah. You got to understand. James and Jonathan both. They're both intellectual guys. They are. They're readers. And but anyway, Jonathan was on staff, and I had been concerned before I came on staff.
Nobody knew Jonathan was a homosexual at this point. He was
Right.
actually outed by a man he met on Grind. I'm just going to say, I know people know. Like, what was the name of the guy at Woodstock who was a homosexual?
The guy at Woodstock?
The guy who was over the
Oh.
psychology ministry.
Oh, Roy Blankenship.
Roy Blankenship. So
Yes.
these people do get in there. All right.
Yes.
Okay. So,
But I'm going to defend Johnny, though.
Johnny didn't know.
Of course not.
No, he wouldn't have let somebody. I'm just
Johnny
saying,
would not put up with that.
people get under the radar.
No,
I mean,
no.
Roy Blankenship. What was the name of that ministry that became
Hope Quest.
Hope Quest? And he eventually quit Hope Quest and quote unquote married a man. So these people get into churches.
True.
That actually happened. What's Nelson Price and Ernest
Roswell Street?
Roswell Street had a
Baptist.
homosexual on staff.
Okay.
Like maybe the executive pastor, somebody high up. Like,
But Johnny,
so it happens.
but
And
Johnny
if these
didn't know
guys
that.
knew, they would cut it out.
This guy was married for many, many years, and Johnny would have never allowed that.
But
No.
as far as Jonathan Merritt's outing happened by a guy he met on Grindr, which is one of these
Azariah
hookup-
Southworth.
Yeah, one of these hookup apps. And he's like, "Oh, I fooled around with this guy who's this Baptist, but
Yeah, he lied.
He met me on this gay app."
Yeah, Jonathan lied about it,
Okay,
and
so
they covered for him.
that hadn't happened yet. But I think what Scott is saying is there were suspicions that, hey, this guy.
Yeah, I'd already been reading things that he had been writing before I came on staff there that greatly concerned me.
And there are
Okay?
people you can tell. I just have to say this:
Yes.
nobody knows their son like the mom and dad.
Yes, I
You want to say
Yes.
that they didn't know
Yes.
this about him? I'm
Yes.
not believing.
I could say this. James could deny this. He could deny it, but I find it. I would question him big time to his face. I believe, can't prove it, that he knew his son was gay when he had his son on staff. Okay? No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Yeah. So when I came on staff, I was working with Jonathan. He was overseeing our college and singles. I was working with our Bible. I was doing outreach and Bible fellowship groups.
So
whatever
at
we
this
called it.
SBC mega church by this SBC luminary, the
Yes.
pastor's closeted son is handling the singles and young people ministry.
Which now, looking back, is very scary. Okay? Very, very scary. I'll tell you when I started getting concerned as well. I remember the first time being around him, and he was in my office, or maybe it was his office, and the way he would sit in the office. I'd never seen a straight man tuck his legs under his butt, and he was holding a coffee like this. I had
so
never.
he's sitting on his leg.
No, not like that. Tucked under
Both legs?
Both legs, like
Under the
almost
butt.
like how I see my wife sit in the morning, and
You
with
guys
her
can't see
coffee.
me off camera, but I'm
Please
sitting
don't.
as
Please.
femininely
Yes,
as I
yeah,
can.
yes, don't, yeah. And I used to look at that stuff, and I pay attention to those type of things. But believe it or not, I
His
just
masculinity.
yeah, he wasn't a very masculine person from his voice to just his mannerisms. But I mean, look at Mike Tyson. Look how Mike Tyson talks. Yeah, he's got a weird voice, but I don't want to get punched by him. But so then I noticed in his college and singles area, it was decorated very, very modern. Now, somebody may say, "Well, is modern? Does the church like singles college area have to look like it did at Snellville, like from the '80s?" No, it doesn't. Does having a modern piece of furniture in a singles college room make it liberal? No, but when you start seeing Relevant magazine and some liberal magazines for young people where they can be reading things, I noticed those and took pictures of them. Actually, I was very concerned. Then the articles he was writing, he always seemed to be beating up the church. You go read Jonathan.
Writing in what publication?
Oh, he was writing all over the country. Jonathan was writing in if I'm not mistaken, I may have some of my newspapers wrong here, some of the media outlets, but I mean, he was writing for people like New York Times level, Washington Post, Huffington Post, and
Huffington Post.
any minister.
Outright liberal.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody know. I mean, I'm not saying that they're
Yeah.
reporting fake news.
Yes.
But that's a liberal publication in an
Correct.
SBC singles ministry from
Yes.
Liberty University and
Yeah.
Southeastern.
No
Baptist
minister
Theological
should
Seminary.
ever be writing for Huffington Post.
Unless they're giving like kind of the anti.
Yes, unless they're saying, hey, share the gospel.
Like Hannity and Combs. They got Hannity and Combs.
Yes.
If you're being the Hannity or the Combs.
So I remember, he was doing that a lot. And I remember one day in his office, he had like a book bag or something, and he had a very questionable magazine that was like a gay type magazine, something like a Atlanta something. And I remember asking him, like, what is this? And it was like, but he was writing about a lot of things that, about homosexuality, about, he was always kind of coming across like Azariah Southworth described him, a defender. He was a new type of Baptist minister, how the church was beating up homosexuals. And it's just pure lie. I mean, he is not honest in his writings, and he hasn't been. Okay, while I will give him that more preachers probably will deal with homosexuality more than maybe saying married men cheating on their wives. I will give him that one. But here's what guys like James, these guys don't understand. Here it is. You don't see the cheating husbands club
or cohabitation.
Yes, the cheating husbands club going around putting on parades, showing, like they're having sex on a float with another woman that's not their wife.
Daisy Dukes.
Yes, you don't see them trying to change school curriculum. You don't see them trying to change government. You don't see them sending, cheating men to the public school, to the libraries to read books to children.
Yeah.
The homosexual agenda, it is a lie from Jonathan Merritt. Jonathan, if you watch this, you're lying. You're not being honest. You're making things up about the church. The reason that the homosexual community, like you, disagrees with churches is because when we say that homosexuality is a sin, we're confronting sin. And I just reading his articles, and then I was getting church members. I wasn't the only pastor, and I'm not going to name the other pastors, but I'll say this: there was 2 other pastors on our staff beside me that were getting church members coming up to them saying, how is he writing these things? They were shocked about how Jonathan was writing things, his liberal stance.
So church members are concerned.
Yes, I had church members.
Unbiblical things he is writing and coming to their pastor.
I had people that left with James from Snellville to come to Cross Point that were stopping me in the hallway. I had some to call me to meet them for lunch and saying, how is he serving and writing these things? What does his dad think?
Do you think he'd have got fired if he wasn't his son?
Oh, absolutely. And if a minister wouldn't have fired him, then we have a problem.
You fired Snellville for that?
Well, yeah. You know what's so funny is the old James. So you'll have people today that may listen to this, and they have this picture of James, the old conservative. I remember James preached a message a long time ago called "The Use and the Abuse of the Juice." Like James is one of these guys. Like sticks his finger in there, it feels the direction. And back in the 80s and 90s, it was very popular to talk about soul winning, evangelism, church growth, preach against alcohol. Mm-hmm. James is the type of guy that just, while some people will say, oh, he'll stand on his own, it's popular now to be a little progressive.
And now he's progressive.
Yeah, well, yeah, he would deny it. He would push against that.
But this is not uncommon with Southern Baptist leaders. Al Mohler, they kind of move with the wind. This finger to the wind, I think that's a great description
that's how they are.
Southern Baptist leadership.
They're not strong. These are men that we looked up to at one time, thought that they were strong men. These were men that I thought they told us to contend for the faith. When you read Jude, contend for the faith. And I look at them now and I just go, these are weak men. These are men that are weak. I want to say this. James, you're a weak man. And Aiken, you're a weak man. The fact that Aiken that you hired Karen Swallow Park, just that alone. I mean, even if we don't even, just that alone, Southern Baptists should be enraged. And here's what's so sad about Southern Baptists.
This is why we have Pentecostals in Iowa making enemies within the church with our Baptist leaders in there.
You know how this is so sad? There's no reason that J.D. Greear should be president. There should be no reason that Kevin Ezell, any of these guys have any of these leadership roles. Southern Baptists are still, by and large, traditional, and so the Conservative Baptist Network. I'm thankful for it, but they just need to do whatever it takes to rally the to the typical Southern Baptist, we would never. It wouldn't even be close. You get the regular Southern Baptist to the convention, and there's no way the J.D. Greers, Ed Linton, those guys will be elected.
They won't. It's you got a blue state with 80% red state voters or red state population, but the voters are blue somehow, and that's how it happens.
Yes.
But getting back to
James
Crosspoint, to whom did Jonathan report on the organization?
Well, Crosspoint was changing their staff all the time in one specific area, which was I forgot what we called it, groups or whatever, Bible fellowship groups. So I oversaw it for a while. Like they weren't happy with this person for a while, then they bring me in. So Jonathan did, quote unquote, report to me for a little while, but I reported to his dad, obviously. I mean, so
uncomfortable position.
Well, it was just weird. But I just knew with Jonathan. I mean, let me say this: I had a girl to approach me that was on staff that she had went out with him to not on a date, but it was like invited him to something where she could have a guy with him, with her, excuse me. And she came back to me and told me, he's gay. He's gay. And I'm sitting here like in my church office hearing this.
So you have a church member, this girl comes and says,
she was on staff.
On staff. I took him to this function as my male escort. He's a homosexual.
So she told me.
So eventually, you have to go to James.
Yes, I mean, it was getting to the point where, there were things that they were doing in the service that were bothering me and two other ministers. The other minister, I won't name his name, had integrity that he would stand for things. He did.
I just want to be clear. This isn't like a Calvinism issue.
No.
Or anything like that.
I remember we invited like some black ladies, or we had some ladies to sing on stage. We were doing some kind of thing on the family. Mm-hmm. And they decided in the middle of a worship service, we're going to play like a game. Like we're going to play like a game in worship service where like families would compete against each other. And like if you lost, you got like duct taped on stage. During a church service. And I was sitting by this minister and his wife and my wife and I. And they brought, if I'm not mistaken, they brought in a group of black ladies, or maybe there were some white ladies that tried to pull it off. I'm trying to remember. I'm obviously having a blank.
Singers type
what do you call it? We Are Family. What's the group that sang that?
Sister Sledge.
Or something like that.
Yeah, Sister Sledge.
So
they bring in like generic Baptist Sister Sledge.
And I'm sitting here kind of going.
And they're singing We Are Family. They're singing that.
Yeah, we're all clapping. Oh, family. Yes.
I got all my sisters.
And they would started. One of the warning signs, like for me, okay, is like if I'm ever church reaches out to me to talk to me, and I find out they have what's called a creative team.
Oh. Yeah, I got
creative teams, you know.
You
bring on like these progressive church members. They work with the pastors and design the services.
This is James just moving from 90s church growth movement to
copying Andy Stanley,
Stephen Furtick. That's
and by the way, one of the problems is I went in there my first week on staff. They had like a little bookstore over near the worship center, and I started seeing many book titles of Margaret Feinberg in there, Andy Stanley. All these people that Jonathan runs with, like, I think I even saw, maybe I don't know if he's written a book. I remember Shane Claiborne or something like that. All these radical
progressive
guys. Yes, and I'm sitting here kind of going, I remember the James Merritt, stand against, drunkenness. Homosexuality is a sin. James
that played in the night.
Listen, James was against, like, I think it was First Baptist Decatur back in the day when they were trying to hire a female pastor.
They got kicked out of the convention.
Yes, James Aiken, James Moeller, all those guys. Here's why they're weak men. I'm gonna tell you. Here's why they're weak men. They just whatever. I think this is what I think has happened. Somehow,
Al Mohler. In the 80s,
Al's a weak man.
Protested, had a petition
Al is a weak man.
Favor of female pastors in the 80s.
Yes.
You can Google this. And then all of a sudden the conservatives won, and Al Mohler is against female pastors.
Yes, zero respect for Mohler.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, they don't have biblical theological convictions.
Al likes
numbers and money.
And Al would never Al was not like Tom Askell. See, Tom Askell would say, this is what the Bible says. like getting back to the Calvinism issue.
And
Al,
that's what
Al would
Tom
always,
Haskell
yeah.
isn't nobody. So sorry, like to you, he's somebody.
Yes,
but in the Southern Baptist Convention, he'll never be president. He'll never be the guy like Al Mohler is.
I'm with you.
Because you have convictions, you stay small.
But see, that's what makes Tom Haskell neat, in my sense. That he's not like
he's got his thing, but
yes,
he'll never grow beyond his niche, and that's okay with him.
That's okay with Tom.
And when I say he's nobody, I'm not insulting him, because people listen to this don't know. A lot of them don't know who he is.
I got you.
So, you're going to have to confront James about Jonathan's homosexuality and progressiveness.
And that happened.
But before we get to that, speaking of profaning the pulpit, tell us about Fortune High-Tech
Marketing. Well, that actually came after that was when I was there, but then, okay.
Oh, this is after you left.
Well, let me say this. No, you're right. I'm trying. I think my. We've talked about it so much. You've got the order here better than I do.
Okay, so I'm off camera here, but I'm on the recorder. I've actually been given a presentation selling Fortune High-Tech Marketing to me by someone I went to church with.
Really?
This was at Tabernacle Baptist Church, and it was Jeff and Kim Lewis. Jeff Lewis was my Sunday school teacher, because I went to the couples, newlies, and nearly wed class. I don't know if he was ever a deacon or anything, but he's going to be one of the guys who's going to pass the offering plate around. He was my state representative. He lived in my neighborhood. He had a big business selling signs.
Yeah.
And he invited me and my wife for a business opportunity, to come eat dinner with him for a business opportunity. And I'm thinking, he wants to ask me something about accounting, because I'm a CPA. I was actually out of work at the time, and maybe I can help him with that. We go to some big room where he's catered, and there's a bunch of people there from the church, and they're talking Fortune High-Tech Marketing.
Wait. When he came out to speak, did he have the same music that James came out to at his own church?
No. Celebrate. We'll get to the video. Now, this did not happen in the church building. This is a building that he rented, or he arranged to have. And the idea is this. It's sort of like Mary Kay or Rodan and Fields, where it's network marketing. But what you do is, you sell Verizon cell phone service and DirecTV service to your friends and family. They sign up for Fortune High-Tech Marketing.
They paid $100.
Pay $100. I think it was $300 when I was supposed to do it. And you pay $300, and then you're allowed to sell. And then people they're allowed to sell. And it's like you're creating this network. And the idea is everybody you know has cell phone service. Everybody you know has TV service. Shouldn't they be buying it from you? And I remember being very offended that they're trying to sell me this at church. I'm like, I don't want a quarter every time somebody buys Skinamax on DirecTV. I don't even want to sell this. And I remember Kim Lewis sat down next to my wife and said, I heard this presentation in the pastor's office, and I lost it on that woman. I said, how dare you use the pastoral office to try to sell my wife on this scheme? And it's like, I wanted to say pyramid scheme. No, and here's the thing. Fortune High-Tech Marketing, which is the most ridiculous name, and it's nothing high-tech about selling people cell phone service. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. It was shut down. You can Google this. By the Federal Trade Commission. Shut them down. Fined them like lots of money, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. It was a scam, according to the Federal Trade Commission. And this was all over the Georgia Baptist Convention. It was at my church, Tabernacle Baptist at the time. And apparently James Merritt, very popular in the Georgia Baptist Convention, is selling it. So much so that he gets in his pulpit on a Saturday. Tell we got video of this.
Well, yeah,
there's video of this.
We do.
But just tell them what happened.
Well, I was hit up by him, and I remember him and his executive pastor. I went to the executive pastor's office, and they started laying out like Fortune High-Tech Marketing to me as a staff member.
During the workday.
During the workday.
He's getting paid to evangelize people during the workday.
Yeah, during the workday. They were trying to get staff members to sign up for it, and it was just sick. And, pay $100 and you get into Fortune High-Tech Marketing. But James would, I believe when he did that conference, when he had FHTM at his own church, like he brought them in, it must have been on a Saturday.
What did he park in the driveway?
Well, there were a bunch of cars, I was told, that had, they were like fancy cars. I think some of them may have had some ribbons on them, like some Lexuses, like they were like, I don't know, 3 or 4 cars lined up outside the building, like to tell people you can work to this, get to this.
Like here's a Lexus.
Yeah, and he had
parked in front of the church
had on his, he was wearing that day he's a big Georgia fan, and James goes to all the Georgia games, and he had a Georgia shirt on. I think he did this conference and did like a welcome time in the morning, and then he probably took off to Athens to go watch them play. But he got in his own pulpit on a Saturday. I mean, it doesn't matter that it wasn't a Sunday, honestly, because we've been in worship. The fact that he would bring that into his church, and he actually got up, and and there's been stuff written about this, where he was actually telling people, like, at the end of the service, people come up to me, they're hurting, instead of like praying for them, I can tell them about the hope of FHTM. Just what a sick.
And this is a guy who's been making hundreds of thousands of dollars for
That's
years.
just sick. I mean,
and the economy's bad at this point. I want people to remember.
That was back during the building problems, when the builders were having problems.
Yeah.
That was.
I remember being out of work. The economy was bad. Yeah. I worked for an accounting firm. They let a bunch of us go. I'm trying to remember what year. I want to say it was around 08, 09, if you remember, during that bad economic time.
Yeah.
This is when people are coming to him at church in need, he's like, let me hook you up with Fortune High-Tech Marketing.
Yeah, well, he said it. It's his own words. See, this is
making money off the poor during
after a service.
A period of poor economic, just a poor economic situation, making money off poor people by selling them what the federal government declared a scam.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
that's a shepherd?
Yeah. He never.
How much money does he need?
Yeah, well, he doesn't, and it's just. It was sick, and he's just a guy that people need to wake up to.
Tell us about Pastor's Resource. What is it? This is before Ed Litton and Docent.
Well, yeah, he has his Pastor's Edge.
Pastor's Edge. Yeah, what is Pastor's Edge?
Well, Pastor's Edge is where you can go and get material from him. You have access, but you got to pay for it.
So he sells access to his sermon outlines.
Resources, how to build your sermon. Oh, well, not just build your sermons. You can get them. He had this thing called Pastor's Edge. He's a guy.
So just for the Docent and Ed Litton and copying J.D. Greer and the Docent group designing J.D. Greer sermons is nothing new. James Merritt had Pastor's Edge. You can be a mega preacher like me.
Well,
that's the message.
Well, yes.
Selling tapes and outlines.
Yes,
it's a business.
Yeah, he has that. But what's you mentioned earlier about the character of this man. I got to be honest with you. I laugh. Laugh not in trying to be ugly, but you just have to. When you look at how this man has no business going around leading. Men's conferences. He got into that for a while. He was being brought into a lot of churches leading men's conferences.
He's leading men's conferences while he's employing his homosexual son as a minister.
Oh gosh, yes, he would be doing men's conferences. His kids are. That's a whole other.
Men's conferences is a whole revenue thing in that church.
Sure it is.
Not
sure
just
it
his.
Is. Sure
Johnny
is.
has his men's conference.
Sure is.
There's a lot of money in that.
There is.
I think that. You've told me about the men's conference culture at Woodstock. We're not going to go into that.
No,
let's go in because we got two things I want to talk about to finish up. One is the Rastus joke, and Danny, that's coming. We're going to put the cherry on top, if you will,
on James and Danny on that one.
But let's go to what happened when you confronted James Merritt in his office.
Okay, when I confronted James Merritt. He was upset that he knew that I had been talking to some people about his son. But I had people coming to me.
So you went to him and said, James,
yes,
people are coming to me about John.
Yes. And then, he and I, it got pretty heated. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. It was really heated. He was behind his desk, and he just got up from behind his desk, and he came over to me, and I'm a much larger guy than James. And
you sitting down or standing up?
I think I was standing up now at the time. Yeah, I was standing up at the time. And he comes over to me, and James put his forehead on my forehead, leaned his forehead into my forehead, took his finger, and started pounding into my chest. Not with a fist. I want to be honest. Not with a fist. But pounding into my chest about his son, about like how dare I talk about his son, and blah 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 this, and he was pounding, and so finally, I don't know if he remembers in the heat of it, I said, you need to take your finger off my chest, Now, my flesh wanted to clock him because you don't do that to a man.
You have to know.
But I didn't.
I mean, he's intimidating you as the boss, right?
Well, he's not much of it. He's not a very intimidating man.
Do you think you could beat him up if y'all went after it? I mean,
listen,
he's not.
I don't want to.
I'm just saying, like he's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Mike Tyson back there. Like,
no,
you better stop messing with me. Yes, sir, Mike Tyson. Please don't.
Yes. No,
so he's in his position of power
yes.
at his church that he founded, and he goes to this staff person.
He's pounding his finger on my.
This
my
not
chest.
just any random staff person. Some guy who used to babysit his kids and worked for him for years.
Yes.
And let me tell you what would happen like that at my office.
Yes.
That guy, if the president of the company, that guy would end up.
Kept going back.
If that happened, and I think in any secular workplace, that guy would get fired, and the company lawyers would be saying, "Please sign a settlement."
Oh, that's coming.
Please sign a settlement so you don't sue the company for millions of dollars.
Yes. Yes.
So this is this pastor, quote unquote, pastor's edge. Fortune High Tech.
Oh, and now he's hired to teach Christian leadership at Southeastern Baptist.
Who's been hired to teach Christian leadership at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary by his friend Danny Aiken. Goes to his staff person, a man who's known for years, leans his forehead at him and starts poking at him aggressively. Hard. But that's a tort. It's battery.
I had to move his hand.
It's also a tort called assault because this is my legal opinion.
Yeah.
Assault as a civil tort is violence or threatened violence.
Yeah.
Battery is touching. Assault is violence or threatened violence. So in a civil way, this is assault and battery. That's what the world says.
Yeah, it got so loud that his secretary, he had another meeting with a couple. There was a couple outside of his door coming in for something, and his secretary had to come in and say, "What is going on in here?" I mean, it was loud.
That's the character of James Merritt.
Yeah, that's when I looked at him and said, I'm done. We're done. So me and another minister left that day on staff. We left. I went straight to my office to start literally boxing it up, cleaning my office out. He eventually comes down to my office. I'm doing that, going, let's calm down. Let's calm down. I said, no, we're done. I'm going to go to a doctor. And because, I mean, listen, no, he did not throw what you and I as men know as a fisted punch. So let me be honest on that. But you do not poke another man's chest over and over and over. I mean, I literally almost wanted to, in my mind, I wanted to pick him up and just body slam him.
Who has the ability to hire and fire you there?
Oh, James does.
It's not the church.
Oh, no.
Some people think it's a Baptist church, so the church has to vote on it. That's not how it goes. He decides. So the man who holds the power over your livelihood.
And there are people that would have backed James up no matter how much I had. Listen, that's why they surround themselves, a lot of these guys, with certain type of men that if they just say it, that they're going to believe them. It's sick. It's sick. So this other minister tells me, he said, you need to go to the doctor right now. I mean, I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not lying to you here. My chest was hurting. I mean, I had to literally move his hand from finger from my chest. I went over in the Hamilton Mill area, over in the Beaufort area. I went to an urgent care doctor. No, I went to a regular doctor, and when they asked me to take my shirt off, I had marks. And that other minister was with me, by the way. He was actually with me. And the doctor said, I can write up a thing here. You have marks on you. And the doctor...
I want to pause right here. I want to pause right here because a lot of people are going to turn it off right now and say, well, you got to have 2 or 3 witnesses to criticize an elder. All right?
Yep.
Granted, this is the wild, wild west America because James Merritt founds his own church. He's all of a sudden an elder. So that's one thing. But number 2, 1 witness, the other minister there is 2.
He was with me. He was with me.
This can all be verified.
Yes, he knows it, and he was with me. And then, the associate pastor across from him didn't know about it at the moment. And then all of a sudden, my phone starts ringing. He goes, what in the world happened between you and James? He's freaking out. And he's like, Scott, please think clearly. Please think clearly. And so I'm at the doctor, and then my phone starts ringing about an hour and a half later, and I would never answer it. James kept calling my house, telling me to call him. I think he was nervous.
He knows he's in trouble.
Yeah, and I could have... I could have called the police. I could have called the police. And I had people tell me that I should have done that. But I didn't do it. And so he would not let me and this other minister who left, they would not allow us to come back to our offices on the property and box up our own books, stuff. They made secretary. We were told, the administrator of the church met with us and said we had to meet him in a certain back parking lot of the church parking lot. We were not allowed. He goes, and then to show you how, James said he was so sorry about what happened. But then the administrator was given, you could tell he was embarrassed, didn't want to do it. He was given a message to give to me and the other person that he never wants to have anything ever to do with us ever again. And so here's the man that supposedly, but he was supposedly so sorry about what he did. But then you got to know this guy. Listen, did you know if you go to people, I can give you names right now of guys that went to Snellville that didn't go with him to Cross Point. I know one guy right now that will tell you there's a joke about James, and it's true. You'll never get James to apologize for nothing hardly. The man will not. I'm just telling you right now. I had it lined up where I remember one time with James to go meet with this guy that didn't go to Cross Point. This guy who'd left the church at Snellville because he was upset with some things, and James would not go meet with him unless the guy admitted like he was wrong. He's just that type of guy. Those are listen. That's the opposite of biblical reconciliation and seeking forgiveness and fellowship. That's who you have with Aiken, Moeller, and Merritt. Yeah. All these guys.
And I want to make this clear that Scott could have sued him. He could have called the police. How many years ago was this?
Golly. 10 years ago?
He could have done all this 10 years ago. Called the police, sued him for a settlement, but he didn't.
No,
and here's
not
the thing.
10, probably 8.
8 years ago.
8 years ago.
But he's saying it now because now you have this guy being a seminary professor.
Yes.
Hired by Danny Aiken to teach Christian leadership to young men.
And that's a joke.
And now he's running his mouth on Twitter.
It's a joke.
Endorsing his son.
Well, and it's not just that. Remember, he ran his mouth at the convention about.
Yes.
I want to address my. He makes that James Merritt famous face, and he's like, I want to address my white brothers and sisters in Christ. About you don't know what it's like being black, and I want.
Did he ever tell his black brothers the Rastus joke?
No, and he needs he needs to come clean, Seth.
All right, let's
about Rastus.
Put pause on Rastus for now. Eventually, obviously, you can't work there anymore. Did he give you a severance package?
Oh, that's a whole other story. Yeah, I had to go meet me and the other pastor. I can't remember where he met, but he signed his severance package. But the severance package clearly, and by that time, by the way, I was already talking. I had reached out to Johnny about the junk that was going on, and Johnny had opened the door for me to come back to Woodstock, which I did. I went back to Woodstock. I mean, so
luckily you had another job.
But Johnny was very clear to me. I could not start working like quote unquote full time until like it was like January. Mm-hmm. And so the severance package that I signed with James was very clear. It said I could go and speak at places. I could go, like, in other words, it wasn't where it restricted me. Like, they paid me for X amount of time. So when I went to Woodstock, I wasn't making what I would normally need to make, right, to take care of my family, and until like January started. Yeah. Well, so James and them started sneaking around, and I know for a fact that they had called a certain secretary up at Woodstock to kind of find out, like, what like, I know Scott's working up there some now, but I wasn't working full time. I was actually helping out their Sunday school ministry for a few months till I could start full time. And they sent a thing threatening to not pay me anymore. And I had to actually get an attorney. Now, Seth, an attorney, I'm a Christian man. And that's Christian. See,
supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly. And you would think that you could be able to sit down with brothers and sisters in Christ and work through that. So they had to send a letter, a certified letter to 3 of them. I had them send it to 3 of them on staff over there. And all of a sudden, James's son, who's an attorney, his oldest son, got involved and said, well, yes, it's very clear, blah, blah, blah. And so they started back paying me again. That's the kind of man.
For money at Cross Point?
No, sir. No, not at all. This is the sneakiness This is the man. See, there have been people that have waken up to this man. There have been people that have waken up to this man over the years, and they've gotten out. And I'll just tell you something. You can go back and do some interviewing with some people that used to serve with him back in the days at Snellville that were run out. If they're honest, I know some of them that have been greatly hurt over the years, how he treated people. But where I'm just finally had enough with him is when hearing him lecture the SBC about, the whole thing of racism. But here is the man that would laugh and enjoy calling up his fellow minister friends. I remember the days back at Snellville when we would be going out, Seth, on Tuesday night visitation. And James would be in his church car given to him. And he would call some of his minister friends over the country. As we're going to share Christ with people, to share the gospel visitors, and he would go, hey, let me tell you about this joke about Rastus. And he'd get on the phone, and of course, James I have to give James credit. Nobody could tell it like James. I mean, James had a voice of all voice, and he'd start off talking about how these 3 black boys, it was an anti-black joke. It was highlighting, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to say it. It was trying to come across that blacks are just stupid.
Like a pickaninny
culture.
Yes,
that's what he was trying to do. And so the joke would be something like, and again, if James was here, we'd just say, James, tell it. I mean, nobody can tell it like you. He would start off like, these 3 black boys were walking down like this country road, and one of
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Yeah. That would be perfect, Seth. Yeah. And one of them would be going like, Rastus, did you poot in your britches, Rastus? And he'd use that voice. He would tell that
like talking
voice.
Like a black guy.
Yes.
Talking like Bagger Vance.
Yeah. He would try
mister, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And he'd go, Rastus, did you poot in your britches? And James would be laughing. Like, he'd look over at me in the car while he was telling this joke to he would call up his different pastor friends.
He just called it back.
Yeah, he would. And then these guys would listen to it, and he'd go and he'd start laughing, laughing, and he'd go, Rastus, did you poot in your britches, Rastus? And Rastus would go, no, I didn't poot my britches. And they'd go down the road farther, and then one of the other black guys would go, like, Rastus, are you sure you didn't poot in your britches? And Rastus said, no, sir, I didn't poot my britches. And then finally, they'd ask him the 3rd time, Rastus, did you poot in your britches? And Rastus all of a sudden stopped and looked down and goes, I thought you meant today. And so, I mean, that's this man. That's who he is.
He's calling out the leadership of the Southern Baptist, various mega friends.
You, me, yes, Conservative Baptist Network, like we're some racist. And here's this man that's gone around for years telling this joke. I mean, listen, this wasn't like a joke one time. I was with him several times. Several could mean at least 10 times where he used this joke. Matter of fact, it got so sad that I knew of another pastor on our staff at Snellville that started telling the same joke, but he got it from James. This is this man. This is who he is. And he's going to lecture to the Southern Baptist Convention. I want his son to talk about that among his...
Did he make it clear it was like black guys and not just any old...
Oh my gosh.
It's black guys.
like Seth and...
Walter Strickland, are you listening?
Yes.
Tell us who Walter Strickland is.
Walter Strickland is a conservative black man.
Scare quote conservative.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Walter Strickland, the vice president of Kingdom Diversity.
Oh, you mean that Walter Strickland?
No.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
No.
You know what I was getting you mixed up, getting it mixed up with somebody else. I'm sorry. No. The Walter Strickland. Oh, yes.
Walter Strickland, vice president of Kingdom Diversity at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary.
Yes.
Works for Danny Aiken, reads James Cone. Hey, Danny Aiken.
Yes.
This is who you hired.
Yeah.
To
lead Christian leadership.
Now, I want to tell you this, because you told me this a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I reached out to Danny Aiken.
Oh, yeah, you did.
And he said he's never heard the joke.
No way. No way. I bet you he got on that phone with James and said, I just got a call about, from somebody, I guess it was you, obviously, about Rastus. Guarantee it. Listen to me. I want to tell you right now. You listen to me. And I want our listeners to hear. Danny Aiken can know exactly what he will never call James out publicly. He will never do that. Listen to me. These guys have each other's back. That's why I used to tell some of these guys that were dealing with Aiken and these guys with Merritt, I said, boys, you have no idea that these two guys will say anything for each other. I'm just telling you right now.
What socioeconomic group is videoed at his church when he's selling Fortune High Tech Marketing to them?
Wow.
On the audience? Because I remember watching the video, and there's black ladies in the audience.
There were a lot. Well, it seemed like there were a lot of black ladies, and I know James has a lot of blacks in his church where he's at now, and so I would like for him. This is what I think he needs to do.
Quit.
No, he's no shepherd. He's no shepherd. He needs to go public. And he needs to share that joke and tell it with the slang, like how you and I did. Rastas, did you poot in your britches, Rastas? That's what he needs to do. You're laughing.
Stop! It's not funny.
No, it's not funny. The way I just said it. Yeah.
That's his joke.
Yes.
That's hard. This is the guy telling this
Christian leadership
with no fear of any Christian leader saying, James, I don't think you should be denigrating races that way.
Sick. It's sick.
So he acts like he cares about racial reconciliation.
So here's the deal. I want to be fair to him. Let's be fair to him. We've all done things that are sinful, that are wrong. He needs to own it.
Stop it. He needs. This is serious.
Yes.
This is serious.
And he needs to go public.
I mean,
he needs to go public.
But Danny Aiken, Danny Aiken, if you're listening, they canceled Paige Patterson for far less.
Oh yes,
making a joke that was sexist.
And you know who was hitting? You know who was hitting Paige Patterson? Jonathan Merritt was back there hitting him and his little ultra buddies.
Ben, what's his face? Baptist blogger.
Ben Cole.
Ben Cole.
Yes,
I don't know about that guy either.
Ben Cole, famous Ben Cole.
So I mean, this is the world. Who's gonna stick up for James, or who's gonna protect James? It's just.
Oh, he's got foot
They're
soldiers.
not going to do the right thing.
Oh, James has got foot
corrupt.
soldiers. Listen to me. James has got foot soldiers out there that will protect him and do anything in the world for him. It doesn't matter what evidence you put up. That's how sick this is.
Why do they do it?
But they do it because because they know they'll be taken care of. Listen to me. Because listen, I know a pastor right now, I'm not going to say where he's at because it'll give it away, that calls James like his father in the ministry, okay? That adores James's preaching. I know for a fact that this guy knows, because he used to tell me about his concerns with James's son. James wasn't handling certain things. This guy, all he wants from James is just to give him, to recommend him. He's not going to burn that bridge. A lot of these guys, this is what makes you realize that our ministers are weak. Many of our ministers are weak because they don't want to burn the bridges. They need the mega guys. They need the mega guys to take care of them. Okay? And so James needs, this is sick. It is sick. This is sick. This is why you and I are looking at each other just going, how in the world are we just sitting here and guys just let this stuff happen?
I mean, and they are so big. Johnny Hunt's 25th anniversary party.
Oh, yeah,
I didn't.
No.
I was there. Let me tell the story because I was there.
No, I'm going to tell you what.
I know what I'm leading to.
Okay, you're leading to that. Okay.
I was there.
They took care of Johnny. Yes.
Went to church. I was a member of FEC Woodstock for a couple of years. Went to church like any other Sunday.
Yeah.
And they said, guys, I think it was the early service.
Yeah.
Johnny doesn't know this, but we're going to do something special for him. It's his 25th anniversary. And, I mean, they roasted him a little bit. The music minister was like Durham.
Was it Scott?
No, it was
Cliff Durham.
Cliff Durham. He rewrote Under the Boardwalk because that's Johnny's favorite song. And it was Johnny mispronouncing things. He called it Durham and said birthday. And it was just a joke, just razzing him. And then
I have issues.
Yeah, just really good-natured, seeing how much they appreciate it.
Yes.
Now, by the way, this is the Lord's Day worship service turned to celebrate one man. Y'all can digest that. I didn't digest it at the time, But he certainly deserved a 25th anniversary party, maybe just not on Sunday morning during the worship service.
He was a faithful shepherd.
But he didn't know this was, he didn't know they surprised him. And good for him.
Yeah.
All right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I remember they gave him a hand-carved statue out of wood.
Oh, yeah.
From Colorado, and they said this is this greatest statue, and it was hands reaching up and reaching down, and I think it's still displayed at Woodstock. So they made a big deal for Johnny at First Baptist Woodstock. Now, tell about the phone call you received.
By the way, Seth, you and I both know that there's no comparison between Johnny and James Merritt. There's no comparison in the sense of.
It's like Auburn and Alabama, where Johnny's Alabama and James Merritt is Auburn.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, Seth has to always just poke.
I'm just saying, I'm trying to resonate with the people. I'm resonating with the people.
And we are going to play this.
It's like Ohio State and Michigan.
Johnny was always met. He tried to help a lot of people,
yes,
and he did. James was a taker. James is a taker. He takes.
So Johnny gets this big party.
Okay, so Johnny
huge
gets this big
honor.
party. Yeah. Okay, and so I remember getting a phone call. I'll never forget it. I got a phone call from James's wife. Okay, and this phone call, it just shook me. It was out of the blue. So the call was basically, hey, what did y'all do for Johnny? So you got to remember, this is James's wife calling me, going, I want to kind of, what did y'all do for Johnny? She seemed to be upset that the executive pastor that James had at the time and the staff or the church was not doing enough to honor James. I mean, this is how
she was looking for ideas.
Yeah. She wanted to know what the church did for Johnny because James, James deserves that.
That's how they judge each other.
Yeah. James deserves that. I mean, James is a king, and so long story short, so she's asking me everything we did, and I could tell she was fired up when she called me because she felt like, wait a minute, y'all's church really knocked it out of the park and honored, Johnny for his faithful shepherding and preaching ministry. And I gotta be honest with you, when I got off the phone, I mean, it was sick. I mean, I was just sitting there kind of going, why are you calling me about that? See, it's almost like, you got to realize there's people that give and there's takers. And I am fed up along with many others that once believed in James, that are fed up. And they are disgusted. This is a man that has no business being a leader in our convention. This is not a healthy shepherd. The fact that this man deals and talks about racism, he needs to go in front of his church and he needs to tell the joke. Not just say, not do like what he did with his son Jonathan. You know what he did with his son Jonathan when Ed Stetzer...
He didn't tell that joke to Daryl Gilliard, did he?
Oh, jeez. I'll just say, I'll say this. When you get up in front of your church and say, my son, or Jonathan, just had an improper embrace with that Azariah Southward. They were trying to lead the church to believe that, there was something that was not good. I mean, obviously, two men don't need to be, hugging each other or maybe giving each other a kiss or whatever they did. But when Azariah Southward talks about, about that evening, which we don't need to get into because it's so gross and sinful, they covered for Jonathan. They covered for him. And I'm going to tell you something. One of the weaknesses in the megachurch pastor movement is it's like Cosa Nostra, man. It's
always somebody to cover for.
Yeah, they will cover for each other's children. It's like, we got each other's back. And rather than just doing the right thing, it's wrong and it's sick. It's wrong and it's sick. So James needs to share. This is what he needs to do. He needs to tell his congregation the joke with the slang. Mm-hmm. Okay, rastus. Okay, he needs to do all that. Okay, I mean that's what he. No, I want him to tell it like he told all of his buddies for all these years. Okay, he needs to come clean to his church and tell the joke. He needs to also let the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary know of the joke. But I can tell you right now, as we kind of wrap this up, this is what he needs to do. It doesn't matter what he did. Just remember me telling you this. He will still continue to be the teach Christian. I mean, this is a joke. Christian leadership of Southeastern. Danny Aiken won't do a thing. You remember me telling me this. It will not matter.
KRAs. I mean, they got a guy teaching KRAs and parking lots and modern progressive-looking church areas and singing "We Are Family." That's what they want him to teach there. That's theologically bad. Before we get to the culture issues of flat-out assaulting a subordinate, not just anybody in the whole world. You shouldn't assault anybody, fellow Christian or lost person, but a subordinate, an associate pastor, and then just, you're going to be Mr. joking around with this racial joke, but then you're going to act like, in Birmingham, like you're on the racial reconciliation conference.
It's sick.
Guys, they're phonies.
They're phonies.
It's a culture. And this, I think, what do you want to say to the members of his church or the people who follow the SBC? What should they do?
What do you think I should say to them?
I
will tell you exactly what they need to do. They need to run from James Merritt. They need to run from him. Danny Aiken, Albert Mohler, Kevin Ezel, all the
J.D. Greer.
Yes,
stop giving these guys your money.
Yes, and let me say this about you for a minute. Okay, let me say this about you, because this is where even some of the Conservative Baptist Network guys need to understand. Okay, they need to understand this. You listen to me. You either run these guys completely out, and I mean run them out. You cannot. The way to deal with these guys is you defund them completely. You don't give them anything. You wrote the book on it. How can they get your book? If whoever's listening, pastors, it's on Amazon. What is it called?
If you see me in town, I'll give you one. I carry them around in my car, but you can go to Amazon.com. It's the cooperative program and the road to serfdom.
Yes.
The cooperative program and the road to serfdom. It's like $10 or $5.
Yes,
Just get it. 99 cents on Kindle.
We need...
I don't want the money. I want you guys to, because I don't hardly get any. I want you guys to just read it and stop giving money to these people. Because that's an industry with KRAs, and you're a number on a page.
Yep.
You're a giving unit. You're not a soul. They don't care about you. They want your butt in the seat. They want your money. They have a bunch of other people to work for them to get more of you if you go away. And if they ever get in trouble, 1 million people will cover up for them.
Yeah, I mean.
Wrap it up.
By the way,
Scott, I want to go to lunch.
Yeah, I do too. I'm hungry. I will say this to you. He needs to come clean about it. Okay, his church needs to hold him accountable. And but who
he founded it?
Yeah, he founded it.
Exactly.
See, that's how these guys operate. Look, can I just say this? I'm gonna say it. I'm thinking through this word very, very clearly. Okay, very, very, very clearly. They're clowns, folks. They're clowns.
Performing for you.
They're clowns. They're plastic. Now, I want to say this. I want to make sure, I know you brought, and I'm not trying to just be nice for nice. I mean it. I'm not talking about Johnny. This is not about Johnny. Okay? Johnny was good to me. Yeah, we disagreed with some things. Johnny was good to me. I may not agree with everything, but he was good to me. There's no comparison between James and Johnny. Zero. There's not. There's no comparison. James needs to come clean. James needs to come clean on Rastus. He needs to own it. He needs to be clear. And remember what I told you. Danny Aiken will do nothing. Weak man.
I'm not saying balls in your court. Not balls in your court.
He's a weak
Southern. Man. It's not balls in your court, Danny Aiken. We know what you're going to do. It's balls in your court, Southern Baptist.
Yes.
What are you going to keep putting up with?
Yes.
So thanks for listening to this special interview of the Christian Commute. We're 2 hours and 22 minutes in. We got it on video. I hope it's on a Macintosh. I don't know how to work them. We're going to try and render it, but we're going to try that after lunch.
Hopefully,
God bless you guys. SethDunn88@gmail.com. If you have any comments or concerns.
Yes.
God bless. Oh, hit the stop button.
I don't know how long this has been recording.
Stop button.
Is that it?
Yeah.